The 540 is brought to you by StarCityGames.com weekly sale. Go to StarCityGames.com/sale because now until June 21st at 10:59 a.m. Eastern Time, you can save 10% off every single Magic the Gathering promo card. That's right. If you want to outfit your cube with the fanciest foils, this is the time to do it. Pre-release foils. I'm talking the real old ones and date-stamped ones. You looking for cube staples? Judge foils, Grand Prix foils, and even secret layer cards if you missed them the first time around. There's literally thousands and thousands of cards on this sale, and a lot of them are really great for your cube or commander deck or all of the above. Go to StarCityGames.com/sale until June 21st at 10:59 a.m. Eastern Time. 10% off all Magic the Gathering promo cards. The 540 is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel and Design. If you want to get the coolest Magic t-shirts and hoodies and stickers, go to coalesceapparel.shop. And if you find something you like, use gift code SCG to save 10% off at checkout. That's coalesceapparel.shop. Nobody made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
What's up, everybody? Cedric Phillips here, stopping by real quick to let you know about one of Star City Games' newest podcasts, The Receivables, hosted by yours truly, alongside my partner in crime, of course, Patrick Sullivan, where the two of us discuss Magic sets, both past and present, from top to bottom. On every episode of The Receivables, you're going to hear us talk about the facts of a set, the mechanics of a set, the cycles of a set, you know, the boring stuff, before we get into some crazy stories of when we were playing Magic during the times that the set was legal. We've got a ridiculous award show where we give out awards like the Char Rumbler Award for weirdest card in a set, the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for best card in the set, and a whole bunch more. Before we finally decide, hey, what card won the set and what letter grade should we give the set? It's a whole lot of fun. We're having a blast recording them. Hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to it and you enjoy it as much as we're enjoying recording them. Where can you find it? StarCityGames.com or wherever else you listen to your podcast. The Receivables every single week here at SCG.
Welcome back, everyone, to the 540 part 2 of our who knows how many parts Modern Horizons 2 mega review. Actually, we know how many parts. I'm Justin Parnell.
Idea.
Yeah, you have a pretty good idea. I'm Justin Parnell. You can find me at jparnell1 on Twitter, and of course my co-host.
I am Ryan Overturf. You can find me at Ryan Overdrive.
You got to keep them guessing, though. We might just drag it out. Maybe we were like, we just don't like white and blue cards comparatively, and we want to spend more time on the Jund colors. That's how I feel in my heart, anyway.
Could be, yeah. And who knows what random card just sets us off, and before we know it, it's time to stop recording.
True. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of opportunities for that to happen in this set.
Yeah.
As we talked about last week, Modern Horizons 2 looking to be one of the best, if not the best, set for Cube in the history of Magic. So we spent about 2.5 hours last week talking, and one thing that we always do at the beginning of our set review episodes is we want to remind everyone what we kind of grade everything by or classify things as. So if you want to find out the specifics, head back to part 1 and check that out. But Ryan, why don't you give us a real quick rundown of what we're looking at?
All right, so we have two major categories. We have classically powerful cards. The classic cube cards are the cards that go into just the good stuff cubes, the best cards in the history of Magic. You see these cards in a pack. It just makes sense. They're just good. You'll play them with or without synergy generally, or if they are synergetic, they fall into just very common synergies that good cards playing with good cards. And then the custom category, these are going to be cards for cubes that have a little bit more restrictions or maybe sharper focus, where there's a specific thing going on here, or there are specific things that aren't going on here. And you are looking for maybe packages, these cards are there to synergize with other cards, or even just at a lower power level, that sort of thing. And then also we have a subdivision there where we'll have some cards that are custom cube cards. They're interesting in their own ways, but don't merit a ton of discussion. And we'll go over those cards very briefly for the purpose of this set that is just overflowing with awesome cube cards.
Yeah. So we want to make sure we cover everything that we feel like could be in a huge swath of cubes. Now, we're going to miss stuff that you might feel like should fit in your personal cube, and that's okay. This is a set where it's pretty realistic that we could talk about 95% of the cards to have to make sure we hit every single card that could fit into any cube at all. And unfortunately, for those of you that are looking for that 95%, we're not going to do quite that. We're going to cover a lot of the cards, but we're not going to cover all of the cards.
Yeah, and I can tell you outright, this is a set that has a good chunk of reprints, some alternate styles. I'll tell you, there's a classic category. There's a category of cards that we're really not going to go over because they don't really make sense for us to go over. We did an episode on aesthetics some time back, and we're seeing new cards printed with old borders for the first time. We are seeing cards printed into modern. So if you have a modern legality cube, these cards are interesting to you. They're less interesting to me. If you have these self-imposed restrictions and you're breaking out of them, I'm not thinking with those restrictions. So that's going to be a lot closer to you. It'd be a weird thing for us to really jam into this set review.
Yeah. Yeah, because some of the stuff doesn't, it's not relevant in the context of a new card, even though there might be some cards that are important for the context of whatever your cube is, but they're not. This isn't the first time someone's laid eyes on them. So we're really going to just be focusing on those new cards rather than the cards that are new to modern, even though it might have an effect. So.
Yeah, and just general caveat for the podcast, we go over this from time to time. Cube is largely an exercise of I'm blanking on the word. It's an artistic exercise, a self-expression.
Yeah.
You are expressing yourself through your design. Even if you hear us explicitly say we don't like a card, it does not mean you should not like it. And if we don't talk about a card and you're thinking about it, that's no reason that you shouldn't try it. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. We're going to try to cover as much as we can, but our time is finite, and we miss things sometimes. So
yeah, for sure. So speaking of missing things, have you thought about any cards that we discussed last week that you've changed your mind on?
No, and I think that we might come to revisit. We particularly butted heads about some blue cards last week. If you missed that episode, and I'm pretty firm in how I feel about all those cards as I see them show up more and start playing more games with them in mind. So these things might change over time, as they often do, but they have not yet.
Of course, yeah. I've also have not really changed my mind on any of the cards that I felt, other than the card that I. Other than Suspend, which I did not fully wrap my head around the first time when I was making the argument for it. But specifically, I have thought more about Lose Focus, and I have not changed my mind. I've only hardened my stance.
I got my hands on some paper copies last night. Some friends were cracking some boxes, and I was sifting through their bulk, and I grabbed a bunch of Lose Focuses. I'm still
this
big
is
on
a common.
it.
You mind if I grab these?
Yeah, you're not using it, but I intend to.
Exactly. Okay, so we do have a lot to get to today. Like we said, so this little intro segment is going to be quite short today. So we are going to go ahead and take our first break. And this is really a good break for you, because you should brace yourself for all of the awesome cube discussion that is forthcoming, that I have no doubt will blow your mind. Or maybe just have you think about stuff for a second. Either way, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to jump into Modern Horizons 2 Black Cards.
Taking a quick break from the podcast to talk to you very quickly about Star City Games Premium and why you should become a Star City Games Premium member. First, me, Cedric Phillips. I'm the online content coordinator for Star City Games. So if you like me and you want to see me keep my job, you should sign up. And if you don't like me. We're not going to talk about that. Okay, let's talk about what you actually get for signing up and paying the $7.99 per month to become a premium member, which is less than the cost of a couple of booster packs, by the way. It's actually, I think, if memory serves, like less than a collector booster. And they got these set boosters and all these different types of boosters now. So look, let's just say for less than a collector booster a month, you receive the following benefits. Are you ready? 5% discount on all Magic the Gathering sealed products, 10% discount on all Magic the Gathering singles, 15% discount on all supplies, which include card sleeves, deck boxes, binders, all that stuff for when real life play gears back up again. You also get some free entry to some SCG Tour online events if you're digging the SCG Tour online and want to play in some of those tournaments like our satellites and stuff like that. A couple of freebies out there. But let's not forget the big one, the exclusive access to Star City Games website content from many of Magic the Gathering's top players and fan favorite personalities like myself, like Patrick Sullivan, like Sheldon Menery, like Paulo Vitor Damaderosa, who is way too good at Magic the Gathering, Jerry Thompson, Autumn Burchett, Brian Gottlieb, Todd Anderson, Ari Lax. I'm going to forget somebody here and they're not going to like me for it. Brad Nelson, who's back writing for Star City on a weekly basis. Michael Majors, Dominic Harvey. The list goes on and on and on. That's how I saved myself there for people that I may have forgotten. Ryan Sachs, I didn't forget you. I swear, Ross Merriam, I didn't forget you either. Shaheen, hello. Stop playing bad control decks. Anyway, $7.99 a month. Less than the cost of a collector booster pack. Get awesome content, discounts 5, 10, 15% across the board. Get access to some SCG Tour online events for free as well. Head over to starcitygames.com/join premium for more information. With that, back to the pod.
All right, Ryan. Modern Horizons 2 black cards. For my money, I think black has the deepest well of cards for Cube in this set.
Yeah, well,
not by a lot, but a little bit.
It's generally your favorite color, right? So,
yeah. I mean, it is. Am I speaking with bias? Absolutely not. I've never spoken with bias about black cards in my entire life. So take that for what you will.
I just bring that up for context for your statement, but I do agree. So whether there's bias or not in your perspective, black is very deep in this set and a good chunk of classically powerful cards.
Definitely. Do you want to get us started on one that I think we're both a big fan of?
Oh yeah, let's start big with Arcane of Cruelty. For 6 black, you get a 6/6 flying Archon. Whenever Arcane of Cruelty enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, discards a card, and loses 3 life. You draw a card and gain 3 life. So this card's like evocative of Kroxa, Uro, Cruel Ultimatum, just the Titan cycle. There's a lot of just stuff together. Many things happen when it enters the battlefield. They all happen when it attacks as well. And just out of the gates, this is my second favorite creature to reanimate in high-powered cubes. Nothing probably ever will replace Gristlebrand, but if I don't have the brand, I'm looking for this guy.
Yeah, I absolutely love this card, and I think when they, showed the theme of black-white in Modern Horizons 2, and they were saying, well, it's reanimating non-legendary creatures. Everyone's thinking like, well, there's not really that many non-legendary creatures that are as great to reanimate. Rest assured, they provided a couple of good ones and one absolutely stellar all-star one in Arcane of Cruelty right in this set. So I absolutely love this card. For all of the reasons that I had problems with Sarah's Emissary last week, this card is the opposite of that. Because when we were talking about Sarah's Emissary, I brought up how it feels to play against and in practice. And then ultimately it's kind of going to be like a feeling of hopelessness. Arcane of Cruelty is slightly different because the chunks that it does, the effects, the sacrifice a creature, discard a card, lose 3 life, it's all very small and it doesn't feel as bad, even though it's going to play out as bad. But I think that it's great because it's like it just chips away at you over the course of a couple of turns, which ultimately is going to lead to you losing the game pretty quickly. But it's not the complete loss of hope as some other reanimated creatures are, which is, I think, a point in its favor.
Yeah, the enter the battlefield swing is big. I imagine that overwhelmingly, if you get one attack in, the game is over. But some of these other creatures we talk about, that other, the White Archon, we talked about Iona last week. These cards don't necessarily need to get that attack in to actually end the game. So there's a little bit more play going on. The card that I've been comparing this to in my mind is Shieldred Whispering One, which is a very common reanimator target. 7 mana, 6/6 with Swamp Walk. At the beginning of your upkeep, you reanimate something. At the beginning of your opponent's upkeep, they sacrifice something. And it's like a very powerful card if it sticks around, but if it doesn't stick around, it feels like you just spent all your cards and got nothing out of it. So both in terms of this being just a good thing to reanimate, and even if it doesn't work out, you get to reset a little bit, you get to set your opponent back a little bit. And then it is still generally beatable relative to some of the other less interesting reanimator targets.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I think Shieldred is actually a great comparison here because Shieldred is certainly a powerful card, but it's a rare reanimator target that if you reanimate it and they kill it immediately, you are left with nothing.
Yep. And also 8 mana is a lot, but like that's a castable number, especially if we're talking about like your reanimator deck playing swamps. You'll get to 8 of them eventually.
Yeah. And it still feels pretty good when you cast this because you're casting a little mini cruel ultimatum when you get it out. But it's on the opposite side of Shieldred, like I was saying, you get just a small little tidbit. If they kill it then, it still feels like you have done a meaningful thing because you have stripped them of a bit of resources, you've drawn a card, and then you've made them use a kill spell. It's not great. You obviously don't want any of your reanimator creatures to die instantly without having a huge swing, which is why cards like Gristlebrand and cards like Iona and cards like even Sarah's Emissary last week usually have some sort of like meaningful impact. Sarah's Emissary less so, but I guess if you name instant, then they're not going to kill it anyway instantly. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of Arcane of Cruelty. I haven't thought about it in terms of where I would rank it of all-time reanimating creatures. It's certainly in the top 5. You said it was second after Gristlebrand?
Yeah, so I picked up my copy for the Grixis Tubert last night, and the framework there was previously Gristlebrand is like the big bad, and then Emrakul, the Aeon's Torrent around for like Shallow Grave or whatever, and then after that, I went with some stuff that's like technically castable, like Grave Titan. However, the games just don't play out that way. So for that cube, Archon is an upgrade over Grave Titan and a card that I expect to happily reanimate even in a very high-powered environment.
Cool, I like it. Yeah, big fan here. Anything else on Arcane of Cruelty?
It's just awesome. Yeah. I don't really know. Like, there's not really counterpoints. If you're doing a reanimator thing, this card just is for you.
Yep. Yeah, pretty simple. Regardless of like what kind of cube you are, if you have a way to reanimate creatures from your graveyard, I feel like this is one you want to do it with.
Yeah.
Okay. My next one, I think is this is probably one that might cause some discussion because I don't know how Ryan feels about this, but I think this card is incredibly powerful. And that is Bone Shards, which is just a little simple common for 1 black mana. It's a sorcery. It says destroy target creature or planeswalker, but as an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature or discard a card. So Bone Shards, we have seen, in a sense, it is quite similar to Spark Harvest, where you can either pay 5 or sacrifice a creature to get that same effect, destroy a creature or planeswalker. But I think the ability to discard a card to cast this is a massive upside, just on the sense of you have to have less committed resources in play to be able to cast it. And if you are supporting any sort of reanimator, I think this is a black card that is proactively good at getting creatures into your graveyard, unlike something like a simple 1 mana, oh my gosh, I can't think of the name, Putrid Imp, where the only role in the cube is to dump is to be a black card that dumps stuff into your graveyard, or other creatures that their utility is limited. And I think that the upside on this card, even outside of Reanimator decks, is good enough that this is a card I want to put in just about any cube, because I feel like it's going to hit on one of those two sections, either that you want to be sacrificing creatures or you want to be discarding cards.
So I agree that this card is powerful. I disagree with the categorization. While Reanimator does show up in a lot of the classically powerful cubes, it tends to be one of the most powerful historical cube archetypes. That'll make sense. This goes there. The thing about that, like the comparison to Putrid Imp isn't exciting because that card shows up probably erroneously in these cubes, where it's not close to the best option showing up for that sort of thing. And kind of the big thing, when we talk about the custom distinction, when I see a card, I'm looking for other cards. That's the idea with custom. And with Bone Shards, I'm expecting it to be a discard outlet for Reanimator, or I'm expecting it to be part of like a nickel and dime sacrifice theme, where you have creatures that replace themselves in some way. So I'm like looking for those sort of things, and I wouldn't just put this in my deck. I think that this is a card that is a bit reliant on synergies to be very powerful. It's still playable if you don't hit them, but it's like a 23rd, 24th card in those circumstances. So it's very powerful, very high ceiling, and does play into some historically powerful things. So I think it'll make its way into some classic cubes. I just think it more fits into the custom framework.
Okay, that's fair. I guess when I'm looking at this, I am struggling to see a cube where the black section doesn't care about one of these two things.
Sure. It is still the thing where if I have a Reanimator deck and I want this card, it still won't make the best version of that deck if we're talking about a classically powerful cube. Like if I have Collective Brutality, Entomb, Jace Vryn's Prodigy, stuff like that, maybe some tutors, I'm not seeing how I would make room for this card in my deck.
Okay, that's fair. That's a fair assessment. Okay. I'm very high on this card because I think the ceiling is through the roof for synergy, but it is something that you have to be proactively supporting in your cube. I would argue that Reanimator falls in the same category as that, but most cubes support Reanimator in a way, so we'll agree to disagree on Bone Shards.
Yeah, that works for me. All right, next up, this is probably my favorite card from the set. Every time that I see it or hear the card talked about, I think of the song Damn, I Wish I Was Your Lover by Sophie B. Hawkins. But the card is Damn. For black, you have a sorcery, destroy target creature. A creature destroyed this way can't be regenerated. And Overload for 2 white. And remember, Overload is not like Kicker. This is not an additional cost. This card is either black, sorcery terminate or Wrath of God.
Yes. I mean, I love this card.
Like, what can you
I don't
even
know how
say
anyone
about
can
it?
not love this
It's just
card.
obvious. Yeah. It's just so good.
Yeah. I mean, it's so the thing about this is it's quite simple to evaluate, and both sides are good, and both sides would be cube staples. If there was a black destroy target creature with some additional effect, that would still be a cube staple. Now, in isolation, it probably would not. Maybe. But either way, Wrath of God is, we've talked about the only time that Wrath of God is not good is when it's oppressive, rather than it not ever being good enough for a cube. I mean, this card's great. This card's great.
Yeah, the only real thing to talk about is you have some choices. You could slot this as an Orzhov card in your cube. You could slot it as a black card or a white card. I think if somehow you find yourself on the fence and your cube just has Wrath of God, just put this card in over Wrath of God. Like, that just seems like an upgrade for the play experience.
The thing I also like about this card is, so we were talking a few weeks ago about making sure you play both sides. Of saying, I want to add this card, but I need to think about how this card affects other cards. I actually really like that you can now, with this card, you can snipe a Wrath of God with Inquisition of Kozilek. I think that's great.
This one is not going to happen too often in Q, but you can also spell snare it.
You can. That's pretty great too. Yeah. Yeah,
But,
so I think those are benefits for the card. I think it just makes the card cooler, a more interesting interaction.
And more than that, not just like the ways you interact with it, the fact that if you are the Wrath of God player and you have committed to casting both halves of this card, there's just a reasonable number of slots. Like, not every deck that is interested a little in Wrath of God is interested in being a committed be behind on the battlefield in terms of creature style deck. Like, you often play some number of creatures, be they value creatures or you just have like some top end, and you're not always all the way ahead with your Baneslayer Angel. But even if you're behind, you don't always want to wrath away your Baneslayer Angel. And with cards that are as powerful as that, maybe just hitting one of your opponent's creatures is enough to swing the game. And that's why this card is so awesome.
Yeah, the flexibility is through the roof. I actually think that the split of when this is overloaded versus when this is cast normally is probably pretty close to 50-50.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, which just makes it even more awesome. So I think this is the number one. I don't know if it's my favorite card in the cube, but I think it's the number one slam dunk card for cube for this set.
This was the number one on my top 10 list, and I didn't really even expand on it in the article because I think it's insulting to your intelligence to say this card needs to be justified.
Yeah, that's reasonable. However, the next card, in my opinion, needs significant justification. I imagine this is where the most listeners will, well, maybe depending on when you listen to this podcast, maybe by then your opinion has turned around. But the most listeners will have disagreed with my take on this. And first, I'm going to tell you what the card is, and then I'll go into that. Dorothy Voidwalker. This is a 3/2 creature for black. It is a Dorothy rogue. It has shadow, as most Dorothy creatures do. If a card would be put into your opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead with a void counter on it. It's a void counter because it's Dorothy Voidwalker, just to be clear. And it also has the ability tap, sacrifice Dorothy Voidwalker, choose an exiled card an opponent owns with a void counter on it. You may play it this turn without paying its mana cost. People have looked at this card and said, this is the most broken card in the set. I can't believe they would print a card that lets me cast an Ugin on turn 3 for free. I can't believe that you have this free graveyard hate card for black on a creature. I think that this card is fine. I think its upside is very high. I don't personally believe that I think this should be designated in the classic category. I think this card is highly overrated from what I've seen from the community. I think the play patterns of this card will indicate that you are likely to want to be attacking with a 3/2 shadow creature. I know that's very surprising for people to hear, but that's probably going to be its primary mode. And because of that, it makes it slightly more difficult than it appears to be able to activate this ability, because you're going to be aggressively attacking with this creature since you will not be able to block. This creature essentially cannot block. There's a handful of other creatures that have made it in cubes, Soltari Monk and Priest. I've even played Dorothy Slayer in my cube a decade ago, but either way, this creature is going to be attacking and not blocking, and as such, there's going to be less times than it would appear to be able to cast a card for free. And because of that, I think this card is fine. I think it's going to make it into a lot of cubes. I don't think this is a ubiquitous slam dunk into every single cube.
So when I pulled up the file for today's episode, you had this in the custom category, and I will say before I get into it, this is not going into any of my cubes. I think it's classically powerful. However, there's a significant downside. First, I'll talk about the upside a little bit. The play pattern of having this onto into Thoughtseize, like that ceiling, in some ways reminds me of cards like Ashiok Nightwear Weaver, where there's some percentage of the games where it can just end the game abruptly. And even if you're not doing that, 2 mana, 3/2 Shadow, that's a really good threat. If you are a pretty aggressive deck, this is a solid rate for an aggressive creature if you ignore that ability. So you kind of have two things that are pretty powerful and can work towards ways to win the game pretty convincingly. I think that people underappreciate how difficult of a casting cost black is on a 2 mana creature. There's tons of cards with this casting cost in the course of the history of Cube, and many of them are comparably powerful to other 2 mana cards across all 5 colors, and they bounce in and out of various cubes. And the reason that they don't win, that they don't stay in the cubes, that they aren't convincing, isn't that they're not up to snuff, isn't that they can't carry their weight when you cast them, it's that you just can't cast them often enough. And it becomes difficult to justify putting them in decks with other powerful cards. So it's not just this card is as powerful as this card. It's this card versus this card. This card costs black. This card costs 1 red. I can cast the card for 1 and a red along with more cards more easily than the card that costs black. There's a significant burden put on the mana piece. And I tweeted about this card. I said that this is probably the card I'm most conflicted on in Modern Horizons 2. And I think that a weaker card that costs 1 and a black would be way more powerful in Cube than this card. And you can power it down in a few different ways. Honestly, I'm not even talking about a specific thing. Just a weaker card that costs 1 and a black would be more interesting. And I got a few people saying, but the mana's good. It's like, okay, well, this is what you sound like. You're saying, I get good gas mileage. I'm going to drive for 14 hours. That's what I hear when you say things like that. That's nonsense. Just because something can work, just because something is good, it's not a justification to put more burden on it and rant.
A lot of people, people have really magical Christmas land this card. We have talked about on this podcast our dislike for white cards that cost 2 and how those are significantly worse than cards that cost a generic and a white. The same extends for black. The same extends for red. The same extends for every color. If you're talking about an aggressive creature that you're wanting to play on curve, the worst thing you can have going for it is a card where its casting cost is prohibitive on the turn you want to play it. And any card that you want to play on turn 2, I don't want it to have 2 pips of mana. We hate pips on the 540. Okay,
yeah, we are very like those anti-pip.
Anti-pip. We're very pro that generic mana. That just and I 100% agree with everything you said, Ryan. And I think that I would take a version of this card that was just for 1 and a black, and you could change it however you wanted, and I would be more interested in playing it because it's just gonna perform better over the course of several games if you're drawing this card in your opening hand. I don't even know what the argument the mana is good means. It's a cube. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not.
Yeah, like I literally always get Blood Crypt when I want it. Oh, cool. Yeah. I always show up into the Magic Online draft leagues and play against somebody playing 4-color bad stuff, and I couldn't wheel a Blood Crypt to save my life. So if that's working out for you, great, awesome, good for you. Keep doing that. Is this card going to show up in the Magic Online Vintage Cube? Probably. Is it going to lead to some easy wins? Probably. Do I endorse it personally? No.
You know what this card is? It's channel.
The comparison, yeah, I understand what you're saying. That it's going to take a lot of people a second, but yeah, it on turn 2, if you can cast it, if you got the right setup, it's great. It's really bad in a lot of other spots.
Yeah,
and it forces you into a specific role too. That's the other thing about channel is like you need to be able to do channel things. With Dorothy Voidwalker, you need to be able to get a lot of black mana very early.
Yep. Yeah, so I know that people are going to try this in their cube, and I don't think that I'm wrong, and I don't think that Ryan's wrong, but I would love to hear if you believe that we are after testing it.
Mm-hmm.
Not just your magical Christmas land theory, but after playing it in your cube.
There is way more reason to put this card in a color restricted cube. If I was still running the Grixis cube at 360, or if I were to ramp that up to a 540 cube again, then yeah, this card makes a lot more sense. The burden on your mana is a lot lower when there are fewer potential colors you could be playing. But that's the justification for the card being customly powerful, because that's not like most cubes.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where I land. I feel like we really just put this in classic because that is the consensus for people that's not you and I.
Yep. Yeah. Classic for people that aren't as snobby as we are.
So everyone else, maybe it would work.
Custom for you and I, classic for everybody but us.
Okay, great. All right. Then what's the next card? I think I'm gonna have a turnabout from Dorothy Voidwalker for this one.
Yes, we have Grief. 2 black, 3/2 Elemental Incarnation. This is the black member of the Evoke pitch cycle. It has Menace. When Grief enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card, and you can evoke it by exiling a black card from your hand. On turn 4, there's probably still something hanging out. There's a good chance you can catch a powerful card. The pitch cast is great. I think generally this card is going to fit into a cube if you are trying to do reanimator things, but there's like a broader range of stuff. If you're blinking or just doing anything reasonably powerful, just a free duress Thoughtseize kind of effect that can be very good. And specifically for me, this card is such an awesome, I'm calling it a fail case, but it's not really that. But it's not as good as Gristlebrand in turn 1, but griefing your opponent and then immediately reanimating it on turn 1 probably wins a comparable number of games.
Yeah, that's the exact angle I was going to go off of. Being a black card, I like making sure that I can do one of the best things you can do, which is put this into play multiple times within the first couple of turns. And the easiest way to do that is by reanimating it. And that's something you can do in mono black. And even though it's not as good as Ephemerate, where 3 Thoughtseizes in the first 2 turns is going to win you the game roughly 99.9% of the time, 2 Thoughtseizes and a 3/2 body in the first 2 turns is probably going to win you the game like 80% of the time. And I think that's a pretty good rate. Even on turn 4, like I'm actually warmer on this on turn 4 than I think you are. The thing is, because you're gonna know the deck you're playing against if you can wait until turn 4 or not, and if you can't, then you don't need to. You can just evoke it. Because if you're playing against a more aggressive deck, then it's more important to do the thing earlier rather than have the long form card advantage that you would be losing by evoking this card, which is why I think it's just great on both sides.
So that is reminiscent to me a little bit of the putting a card in my Force of Will deck because it's blue. I don't think you get to evoke it when the 3/2 is bad. I think you have to. Have to versus get to is a distinction there. So it still plays. I think if you're doing that and not enabling anything else, it's a card that you would board out in a matchup like that. So I'm not the way there. I did pick up my copy for the Grixis Two-Bird last night, though. Sure. You can always do something that does make sense.
Yes, that's what I mean. Like if if you're not let's say you're in a situation where you're not able to reanimate it on turn 2, and your opponent goes Mountain Skull, Sacred Foundry. You're like, well, okay, I'm not going to wait until turn 4 to try to strip something. Mm-hmm. But if they go Island Hallowed Fountain, then you're like, well, I'll probably just try to cast this on turn 4. And I think that's it seems obvious, right? That but that's the utility that this card is providing in a full game situation against every single deck. And I think this is the one elemental incarnation that I think hits everything. Even though we talked about the white one. I don't remember the name. Solidarity.
Yeah,
Solitude. Yeah, and that's realistically that's going to come up in almost every single game. But grief comes up in all of them. Is the difference for me?
Yeah, your opponent should start the game with some number of cards in their hand.
And if they don't, then grief's already done its job. So
they've had enough grief at that point.
Yeah, I think this card is great. It's not that I think that it is insanely powerful, although I do think it's reasonably powerful. But the floor on this card is very high for me, and that's the kind of card that I'm looking for into making it into a classic category.
I think that it for me, I agree with the classic categorization. It's not quite fitting the bill for me, and it is a small card list, but this is not going into the base model two-bird. It's going into the Grixis two-bird. I think that like making your opponent discard a card at the cost of one of your own is not great if both players are planning on hitting 6 land drops and casting spells for 6 mana. Like 4 mana, 3/2, get a card. That is value. Is that better than something that costs a similar amount of mana and draws 1 or 2 cards? Often it's not. This card is very powerful in the right scenarios. I am much more interested in putting this in a cube that is reanimating. I think it's probably a little unfun, but you can justify it if you're doing ephemerate stuff. If you're high power ephemerate cube, great. Grief is for you. I am asking for a little bit more specific context for my purposes, but the card is plainly excellent.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so I'm going to group the next 2 cards together because I think that contextually they are kind of operating in a similar place, and that is the card Persist, which is a 1 black sorcery. Return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. And Unmarked Grave, which is 1 black sorcery again. Search your library for a non-legendary card and put that card into your graveyard, then shuffle. So we have a Persist being a slightly different Animate Dead that you can't disenchant, and Unmarked Grave being a slightly different Entomb that is a sorcery for 2 mana. I think both of these cards for me fit into the classic category because generally for reanimation and reanimating things, it is more important for the cards to be cheap than it is for them to return the creature or interact with the creature or whatever you're getting in a way that gives it back at full strength, which is why Animate Dead's so good. It doesn't matter, it gives it -1/-0. That's largely irrelevant. And both Persist and, of course, Unmarked Grave are slightly worse, but I think that the best case scenario for the cards they're emulating are among the best cards at doing what they do. So I think both of these cards, even being worse, are still good enough if you are interested in putting cards from your deck into your graveyard and then returning them from your graveyard to the battlefield.
For me, first of all, these cards flavorfully are both 11s out of 10.
Yeah.
You have Persist, that's a way that you would describe something rising from the grave. It literally does what the Persist mechanic does. Also does have some balancing stuff going there where you have a -1/-1 counter, so you can't like really go off with the Woodfall Primus. So
yep, that was the first card I thought of too.
And then a non-legendary creature going into an Unmarked Grave. Love it. I think that the burden of proof for is Persist good in a cube, like that's a really easy bar to clear, even if you're not reanimating. Like if you just are generating value with creatures, you can get some mileage out of a card like this. This card's not difficult to justify at all.
Yeah.
Unmarked Grave does ask you to be a little bit more reanimator, but again, that just shows up in the highest power of cubes. With the Archon of Cruelty entering the fold, giving another great non-legendary creature with Grave Titan and stuff like Inferno Titan, just the Titan cycle broadly. These cards are going to play pretty well with stuff like that. And there's a smattering of other creatures. I think these cards are both just pretty excellent. You don't have to do the Exhume Song and Dance. I do a lot of waffling as to whether I play Exhume in my Reanimator decks. Like if I can get Reanimate and Animate Dead, I'm like, all right, Exhume's on the chopping block, because you don't want to like Thoughtseize your opponent, have to take a creature and then give it to them, or like
it's the card you have to play, not the card you want to play.
Exactly. And Unmarked Grave, sure, it can't get Gristlebrand, but it can get a lot of stuff, and you're not potentially rewarding your opponent, which is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Persist is pretty great. I think there's a decent amount of times that it is going to just be better than Animate Dead, because there's no enchantment that's hanging around that someone can just snipe to send your creature back to the graveyard. So I think that, bonus for that. Certainly losing a little bit on the non-legendary clause, but as we talked about earlier, you're already getting a solid replacement, and I feel like there's plenty of things, especially things that are I mean, I actually don't even know like how many things that you want to reanimate that are legendary, like outside of Gristlebrand and Iona, if you're into that sort of behavior.
The other like oppressive reanimator card that comes up a lot is Elishnorn. It's another legend.
All the Praetors, I guess.
Even that, like Massacre Worm is a lot of the same thing. And you can just retool the creatures you're reanimating too. That's always something that can be adjusted. Like there's no reason to marry yourself to playing the legendary creatures if you have non-legendary stuff and the supporting cast plays better with them.
Yeah. Yeah, these cards are both pretty powerful. Unmarked Grave, outside of the legendary creatures, still does the other cute stuff that Entomb could do, like getting lands for a Crucible of Worlds or putting a flashback card into your graveyard or things like that. So there's still plenty of stuff, even though you can't get a non-legendary card that this is doing in the same way that Entomb is doing.
Those ones will see a lot of play. And now it's time to talk about cards that'll probably see less play. We're getting to the custom category. We'll start with Archfiend of Sorrows. 5 black, 4/5 flying demon. When Archfiend of Sorrows enters the battlefield, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn. And an unearths for 3 black, so a one-sided infest. This looks like an awesome control card for a Peasant Cube. It is an uncommon, and that seems like the natural home here.
Yeah, this is Peasant Cube Massacre Worm for me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it being one-sided is brutal. I didn't even realize that, because this card doesn't necessarily fit into anything that I care about, but, I just read it out loud. One-sided infest is brutal.
Yeah. 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 So it's just like, if you want Massacre Worm, but you are playing common uncommon cube, then Archfiend of Sorrow is your direct replacement for that effect. And being able to unearth this for 5 is also pretty nice. Where you just get to cast the infest and then bash them for 4. But yeah, it's a reasonable body. So if you're talking about doing reanimating stuff, this is certainly a good one for that power level cube.
Mm-hmm. And in Peasant Cubes, it's pretty common for there to be a good clip of stuff that just costs 7 or more mana. Like the games just go that long.
Yeah.
So you can justify this for sure.
Yes, definitely. Okay. Next card. I really love the kind of everything about this card. I wish that this could be more ubiquitous, but it requires people to decide to play Snowlands, and that is Break the Ice. It is a sorcery for black, and it has overload of 4 black, so you replace all instances of target with each, and it says destroy target land that is snow or could produce colorless mana. The reason that I have this in the custom category is I think that in a snow themed cube, that this is actually a really great card. Well, if you're into sinkholes, it's a really great card.
I
am into sinkholes.
Like, sell me on somebody signing it. Why would somebody want to engage with this? That's my question. I think the card clearly can be very powerful. But tell me why I want to do this thing.
If you're into sinkholes, then I think it's great. So if let's say you're playing a snow cube, then you would now have 2 sinkholes. And 2 sinkholes is better than 1 sinkhole.
Yeah, we did talk about snow on an early episode of the podcast, and we didn't bring it up, but I think it is a good point. We were a little bit down on snow, and maybe having 2 sinkholes is what would solidify the experience.
Exactly. Well, no, seriously, like I think that aggressive black decks are generally benefited from having sinkhole, but there's only 1 of them. So when you move that to 2, that's a pretty big deal. I'm not saying, this is why this is in the classic category for me, of course, or not the classic, the custom category for me, of course, that I think this card is incredibly narrow, but I think that this is actually a card that you could reasonably put into a cube that has all snow lands, and it just operates as sinkhole. It just gets basic lands or maybe a couple of other lands, which is still pretty fine. And then for 6 mana, you get to Armageddon.
All right. So I know we started the episode with me saying that being creative is good. You should do what you want to do. This card makes me giddy for constructed. I am upset at the idea of somebody wanting to cube with this card.
Have you ever cast Sinkhole and Cube?
Yeah.
Well, how did that feel?
Fine.
Oh, I love casting Sinkhole. It's the only place I get to do it.
It's like cool in the sense that you have like a really old card. Get your hands on an alpha Sinkhole. There's that rich history. I guess every copy of Sinkhole is pretty old. They reprinted it though. They reprinted it pretty recently. Those ones suck. Don't get those ones anywhere near me.
No, just get the. Yeah, I had a set of unlimited Sinkholes for a long time.
Yeah,
I don't have them anymore. Unlimited is sweet.
But then it's just like the game you're actually playing. It's like, oh, this actually sucks.
I like casting Sinkhole. Look, I'm not the only one that likes casting Sinkhole.
So
I know there's other people out there.
If we wanted to talk about Sinkhole and Cube, I actually am way more sympathetic to this. The issue I have with Break the Ice is you're inviting somebody to this thing like, oh, my cube's cool. There's a fun thing going on. We're playing the Snowlands. By the way,
you gotta
put them in the graveyard, you stupid idiot.
Well, look, it's not okay, Ryan. It's not like you could. I wouldn't put this in a cube that has just Snowlands, but no positive snow payoffs. Like it's just punishing cards. That is not what I'm suggesting. Okay. I'm not saying that you put it in a cube where you don't get a benefit out of having the snow basics. I'm just saying you put it in a cube where you have all of those cards. And then you also have this card as you wanted all those Snowlands. So now I'm going to Sinkhole you.
I think that, your intentions with your friends are more sinister than mine. I take it. I am cold on this card, if you will.
I take it I think this should clear everything up. When I am cubing and I have the cards Vindicate in my opening hand, my intent 100 times out of 100 is to destroy a land of my opponents. Now, things could happen between the first turn and the third turn of the game that changes that. But if I have that card in my opening hand, my intent is to cast it as Sinkhole. Okay,
so I will say, on you and I on that same page. You know, we are of the same mind about wanting to destroy the land, and that's actually why I didn't touch Vindicate for the base model Tubert. Because I hated the idea of it actually happening, playing for fun.
But that's what would happen.
Yeah, that's what I would do. I just don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I do want to do it.
Okay, so that's okay. We've got to the crux of it.
There's an internal struggle happening here.
All right, I understand. All right, well, we'll let everyone listen to both sides and make your own decisions. Just know where you stand. It's important to know the type of person that you are, and I think Break the Ice will help you figure that out.
Yes. All right. Next up, we have Cabal Initiate, 1 and a black for a 2/1 human warlock. Discard a card. Cabal Initiate gains a lifelink until the turn. Threshold. Cabal Initiate gets +1/+2 as long as there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard. So, get Threshold. You have a 2-mana 3/3. Not very burdensome casting cost. 1 and a black. It's a human. That matters. Maybe someday Warlock will matter. I'm hoping someday.
They're working on it.
2-mana discard outlet on a body. That's generally pretty good. You know, this is not the highest power Madness Enabler. However, there's a good clip of stuff that cares about discarding in black. This is one that I'm thinking about for Spooky Cube. I got Humans Matter. I got Madness. 2-mana 3/3 in a deck that can easily get Threshold. Like, you'll play that sometimes. And if we're going scaling back on rarity for a Pauper Cube, this is just a solid 2-drop. Like, you just get Threshold eventually. If you played Odyssey block at all, you would know that.
Yeah, and I that's kind of where I am for lower powered. Obviously, if you're interested in dumping cards from your hand into your graveyard, I think something like this is generally more fully playable than Putrid, which we've already dunked on this show today. So, but yeah, otherwise, I think like this is a card that is a 2/1 with some minor upside, and then if you draw it later in the game, it's just a 3/3, and I think that's pretty reasonable out of a 2-drop. Like it's not super like exciting, but this is a card that does a job, and it does the job pretty decently. And I think cards like that are always worth a look.
Mm-hmm. And especially if we're talking about Pauper, if you're talking about just the 2-mana creatures you include, they all are replacement level. You'll move through any number of them over time. It's not even because a better version is printed. It's just like the cards are just all fine, and you just want to see what the grass is like on the other side sometimes. And this is one that can pretty easily come in and out of a cube like that.
Exactly. And it's, you know, and it's it is a very specific thing that it is trying to accomplish if you're trying to play this proactively, which is, you know, you're probably doing something with Reanimator or a graveyard theme. So this is a replacement level 2-drop that plays to those themes. So I think that, you know, have this one in your back pocket if you're cycling through those themes in your queue.
Yep. Grab a foil, probably cost you 20 cents.
Yep.
Probably always be worth 20 cents.
Yeah. But hey, it's still sweet. I like this card. I like it.
Oh yeah.
Yep. All right. Next one is Clattering Auger. First of all, the word clattering is just fantastic. It is very evocative of the noise that it is making. Clattering Auger. 1 and a black. It is a 1/1 skeleton shaman, which I believe is the first one of those in Magic. Clattering Auger can't block. When Clattering Auger enters the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Of course, that card would be bad, so it also has the ability to black, return Clattering Auger from your graveyard to your hand. This is one, I wish this card were a common, because I want to put this in a common only cube, and I feel like the power level would be appropriate there. I think it's a little on the weak side for a common uncommon cube, but even still, maybe if you care about sacrificing things or discarding cards and being able to return them, it does provide some utility for that. The can't block thing is pretty brutal, because most of the cards that do this specifically block to chump something, and this one is not doing so. So you really have to be proactively sacrificing your own creatures for this to matter more, and be doing it in a long-term situation, because it costs 2 mana to cast and 4 mana to return. But that's still some some value. It just is going to cost you.
This card bums me out because it's so close to being exciting. I think that either it could block, or if it was returned to the battlefield instead of your hand, maybe it's returned to the battlefield. It can block, but it enters tapped. You know, there's a card that looks very similar to this that would be awesome, and this card's not quite there. And so it's a weird spot for me to hold back, but you know, what can I do?
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's why I mentioned that if this was a common, I would be okay with it, because then it just fits into a whole different class of cubes. But restricting it to an uncommon, I think it's like not quite powerful enough for a lot of the reasons that you said.
Yeah. All right. That brings us to Kitchen Imp, 3 and a black for a 2/2 with flying and haste, and it is madness for 1 black. So, you know, let's say you decide that you're going to try out Cabal Initiate in your Pauper cube. This is also a common. 4 mana 2/2 flying haste. That card can be a meaningful just thing to do in a Pauper cube, right? And you just have some discard outlets. There's just like some really good commons that will end up madnessing you like loot or like compulsive research. So there's going to be some stuff. You can lean into it a little bit more if you want to support a card like this, and it is just fine to cast for 4. So this card can definitely be really cool in a Pauper cube.
Yeah, I really like this card, actually. Being able to discard this and madness it out on turn 3 and still have 2 mana up to cast something else, like that's a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm.
This is a decent clock early in the game.
Yeah,
so
and
I really like this.
It's also like one of those cards that helps in a Pauper cube to make the format not just about value. Like, obviously, if you loot and you madness in a card instead of fully discarding it, that is pulling ahead on card advantage. But your deck cares about something. You have to draft deliberately to make this card consistently worth that kind of thing, as opposed to just making your cube all just cards that are 2-for-1s, and you can make the gameplay and the drafting more engaging that way.
Yeah, and I like this for one of the other reasons you said is, you know, that's obviously the goal, is to try to pair this in some sort of discard deck in your cube. But this is not embarrassing on turn 4. It's not great. You would not never put it in your cube if it didn't have the madness, but it's still a 2/2 flying haster. So
yeah, and as far as like just top decking this card in Pauper Cube, you're going to have worse top decks.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I would definitely if I had any sort of discard theme, I would put this in a Pauper or Peasant cube. Yeah. All right. Another one that is more slanted towards the Pauper or Peasant cube, Legion Vanguard. 1 and a black. It is a vampire soldier and a 2/2. And it has a single ability, 1 generic mana, sacrifice another creature. Legion Vanguard explores. Now, generally, I like my sacrifice outlets to be free rather than cost a mana. But I do like this cost a generic instead of a black. If it costed a black, I would be a lot colder on this card, and I'm already very mild on it as is because I think exploring is mediocre. But it is a sacrifice outlet on a decently sized creature, and you don't have to tap it. Once this gets to like a 3/3, if you can explore and put a counter on it, then it's like, okay, it becomes an okay threat to attack and block with as well. So that's where I am.
Yeah, just really not much else to say about the card. Find sacrifice outlet for rarity restrictions, consider it. So we'll go to the next one. Another card that probably is only good if you care about rarity restrictions, but we have Lowsome Curator. This is 4 and a black for a 5/4 Gorgon wizard. It has exploit. So exploit is when it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature. And then if you sacrifice the creature, you get its exploit ability. When it exploits a creature, you destroy a creature you don't control with mana value 3 or less. And this creature also has menace, so giant 5/4 menace. That actually is a big deal in Pauper, just on its face. And then in Pauper, you don't get Necrotal, you don't get Ravenous Chupacabra. So this is actually one of the better ETB creatures that destroys an opposing creature for that format.
Yeah, I think a 5/4 that has this effect is actually pretty massive. I think for a Pauper and Peasant cube, casting this on turn 5 and killing a thing, even if you have to exploit like a smaller creature to do it, that's a pretty big deal. So yeah. I'm very high on this card for those cubes.
Yeah, it's just also just a lot of cards tend to end up in Pauper cubes that just make tokens. You pretty commonly just have a body laying around.
Yeah, 5/4 menace. That is like that's a big deal too.
Definitely.
Yeah, that menace makes a very big jump for this card of being good.
Yeah, without a keyword, it is a lot less exciting. But
yeah, if you're just chump blocking this, it's whatever. But the fact that you have to double chump it, and it's gonna trade with multiple things means I'm in
for sure.
Okay, the next one. This is we're talking about madness cards. This might be the most madnessy of all the cards we're talking about today, and that's Necrogoyf. 3 black. It is a Lurgoyf. When I look at the art, it looks like some sort of alligator lizard thing with arms. I don't really know. Its power toughness, it is a star 4. And it says, Necrogoyf's power is equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player discards a card, and this has madness of 2 black. Brian, does this make it into your spooky cube?
I'm thinking about it, but you know what this card looks like, Justin?
I actually don't.
It looks like a Lurgoyf.
Well, which doesn't look like anything. Yes.
So the thing about the spooky cube, and specifically the color black, is there's a lot going on. Zombie tribal primarily supported in black, human tribal bleeding into black, madness bleeding into black. Necrogoyf does fit the bill for spider spawning. Those cards care about similar things. This card, of course, has madness. It's a little bit expensive for the card you're looking to madness out, but it's a consideration. It's the sort of thing that I probably end up trying. I think with the type being Lurgoyf, It is not necessarily going to stick around, but
You mean you don't have Lurgoyf support in your
there's
cube?
not much Lurgoyf support. Even though I do know what they look like, I still
Okay, well, that gives you a leg up.
Yeah, this card is like, it's close. I want to like this card more than I do. It's a little too much Lord of Extinction, not enough cheap madness creature for me.
Okay. Yeah, I guess so. Now, I do want to note, because I feel like we're not going to be talking about this card when we get to artifacts. Now, I don't know if you know, but there is a card called Altar of the Goyf, which is a tribal artifact Lurgoyf. So if you wanted to support Lurgoyfs in your cube, this also has a picture of a Lurgoyf on them, so you'd be able to identify it just from the art. And it does provide that support that you might be looking for, just for some additional context for you.
Yeah, for the Lurgoyf tribal fans.
Yes. Yeah. I think Lord of Extinction is pretty bad, and I think this card is about a quarter as good as Lord of Extinction. But it does provide that context if you were doing really discardy things. Which is why I asked, like, if this, I don't know if this makes it Ryan Spooky Cube or not.
So it's intriguing that each player discards a card every turn. Once you get up to 5 mana, and honestly, even once you get up to 3 mana, you just get stuff that you can discard for real value. And like, I don't consider a card in your opponent's hand real value in general. Outside of targeted discard, like really high powered targeted discard, like I like Thoughtseize a lot. I tend to not necessarily even take Inquisition of Kozilek on the wheel in a lot of cubes, so that'll show my bias against discard. But I care a lot more about what I'm doing than what my opponent's doing. I think if what I'm doing is good, I should be able to beat whatever they're up to.
I think that's where I am actively annoyed whenever I see Inquisition of Kozilek on the wheel and I'm not in a deck to be able to draft it. I'm a big Inquisition of Kozilek fan, though.
That's
and
how I feel about
spells.
The B tier of counter spells. Like, if I ever see any kind of counter spell wheel, I'm like, what is the matter with you people?
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. All right. So next card. This is a card that is generally, I think, for pauper and peasant cubes, but actually would not be surprised to see this in slightly more powerful cubes. And that is Nested Shambler. This is a zombie for a single black. It's a 1/1. It says when Nested Shambler dies, create X tapped 1/1 green squirrel tokens where X is Nested Shambler's power. I have played Doom Traveler and Doom Traveler's friends in all sorts of cubes of various power levels before, and I think that all of those cards are quite good. And I think Nested Shambler is, even though the token comes into play tapped, the fact that if you even pump its power one more, where you get 2 tokens, I think this card is completely awesome. And that it then becomes better just by the virtue of its upside than all of the other ones. Maybe not Doom Traveler, because that spits out a spirit token, which is quite powerful. But black doesn't have a great wealth of these that are aggressively costed. The other ones that you have are like Doomed Necromancer, not Doom Necromancer.
Doom Dissenter.
It's the one, Doom Dissenter. Thank you. Yeah, that's a 1/1 for 2, and then it makes a zombie. But I really want them to cost 1. And here we have one that finally costs 1, so I'm probably going to be personally trying this one. And I would imagine that this has a pretty high chance of making it into my personal queue.
Yeah, in my experience, if you're trying to support a sacrifice deck, the 1 mana creatures that are 1/1s that replace themselves with a 1/1, you just fill out your mana curve with them. You will play as many of them as you can get. Like, I don't think we're even at the point where they've printed so many, at least in the same colors, that you would stop playing them. You know, you would stop picking them highly, but you would still put all of them that you got in your deck.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. And I think this is the best black one. All the other ones are white and red, ironically. That are the 1 mana ones that replace.
Ones.
Yeah, they're all. It's all of the other colors except for blue and black.
Yeah.
Ironically enough, yeah. So yeah, but black is generally the color you want to be able to do with this. So you finally have one for black, and it's a pretty powerful one. If you ever make more than one squirrel, you're going to be doing really good.
Definitely. All right. Next up is Profane Tutor. Card with some awesome Richard Kane Ferguson art.
No doubt.
It's a sorcery with no casting cost. You can suspend it for 2 turns for 1 and a black. And when it resolves, you search your library for a card, put that card in your hand, then shuffle. So it's Demonic Tutor, except you suspend it for 2 now. Demonic Tutor really only shows up in vintage cubes. It's an incredibly powerful card. And the immediate comparison you can make is Ancestral Visions, which is the Ancestral Recall that suspends 4. Now that card is card advantage. But
yes,
you get 3 cards versus a specific card, but you wait longer for Visions. And black is the color that we kind of talk about really falling off after the very best archetypes. Like once you get past Reanimator and a lot of high power cubes, it's like I don't really know what I'm doing. What I am doing seems less powerful in the other colors. So suspend 2, finding a very specific thing when your 4th best card is so much worse than your 3rd best card. You increase the consistency of these decks, and it's not the most amazing thing happening, but you get so much agency with a Demonic Tutor effect that I could see this even making it into very high-powered cubes, and it just, in terms of curbing power relative to Demonic Tutor, it does that too.
Yeah. I agree with all of that. I was initially kind of cool on this card, but I've warmed up to it. Something that I keep thinking about is the reason that Ancestral Visions is so good is because you can suspend it in the first couple turns of the game, and you don't really have to put any more thought process into it. With Demonic Tutor, you need to have a plan, and you generally want to, say, well, what is the best thing I can do at this time? Oftentimes, I have cubed, and the best time for me from a mana perspective for me to cast Demonic Tutor was on the 2nd turn. But I'm often not going to be able to cast the thing that I'm getting for multiple more turns. I just know that on the 3rd turn and the 4th turn that I have plays that I need to do, I just want to have this card in my hand. In that sense, Profane Tutor is actually kind of actually has some upside on Demonic Tutor, very minimally. But a lot of times, this lets you cast Demonic Tutor on turn 2, but be able to wait 2 turns to make a decision of what you're getting, and stops anyone from being able to rip it out of your hand in any form or fashion. So I think that this card will probably play pretty well. It's certainly not as powerful as Demonic Tutor, but the more that I've thought about this, like in actual practice, the happier I am to include this card.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking about this card for the Grixis Tubert now. That just thinking about Suspend 2, because a card that shows up in a lot of cubes for combo decks is Lotus Bloom. And personally, I don't draft that card very highly. I don't always start it because you don't always have 3 turns to combo.
Yeah.
And also it's just mana, where the choke points, you have a lot of things that make mana. Hitting your land drops makes mana. You do need a lot of it, but waiting 3 turns for only mana every time is not always what you need. It's not always that powerful.
Yeah, it might not matter by the time you get to it.
Yeah, and if you wait 2 turns for any card and it's 0 mana on the combo turn, like that's 0 mana Storm, and it gives you what you're missing. You're not getting just mana. Like this could find your mana, this could find your combo card, this could find just some card advantage card if you may be a little shy on that kind of resource. This card actually, like, obviously it's just worse than Demonic Tutor by its nature, by its design. You think of it maybe a little negatively because it is a worse version of something, but the thing that it is a worse version of is very powerful. So that makes it a real consideration.
I was going to say arguably, but not inarguably one of the best black cards in any cube that it's in, Demonic Tutor. Yeah. So there's a lot of room for something to be worse and still be very good.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think that Profane Tutor is in that. I actually think that this is, if you want a Demonic Tutor, but you don't want that effect, but you don't want to play something stinky like Grim Tutor or Diabolic Tutor or things that are basically more expensive. This is a pretty good replacement for that, for a cube that doesn't quite reach that power level on purpose. And I think in the most powerful cubes, I think this still can be up to snuff for that slot.
I'm willing to believe that we blew it on this one. This maybe should have been a classic card.
I think that it probably, now that we've both talked through it, I think listened to the other person, I am comfortable moving this into classic.
Yeah, I would put it there if we were classifying them now.
We can change it.
All right, deal.
It's in classic. Done. All right. So next one. This is a quite simple one to evaluate, but it doesn't make it any less of a cool card. Sudden Edict, 1 and a black, instant. It has split second. Target player sacrifices a creature. I like Diabolic Edict just fine. It's certainly waned in power over the years, but split second is nice because it's split second. No one can do anything. So I feel like if you have Diabolic Edict and you're like, this card's kind of barely hanging on my cube, this seems like a solid upgrade, like a strictly better type deal. So I don't know. I like Diabolic Edict and Liliana's Triumph. I don't know if this is better than Liliana's Triumph. It probably is.
Yeah, like your opponent probably doesn't have hexproof in your cube, right? The whole idea with Liliana's Triumph, like yes,
they never do in my cube.
Yeah, but it's more that it doesn't target your opponent. So this one does target a player, but they can't respond to it. So it's probably on average much better in cube.
Yeah, and I think if you have like one of these effects, this is the one.
Yeah, I buy that.
Yeah.
I also love the idea. Like some people play really cagey with their Gristlebrand. Like, I don't want to pay 7 life. If I pay 7 life, I won't have 7 life anymore. But you got to do it right away. Otherwise, you're going to instantly lose your Gristlebrand.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's a good. Yeah, I if I have Gristlebrand, I do not need to wait.
Yeah.
There's no reason to wait. You have the thing that you want. Now go get those other 7 cards that you wanted. That's the whole reason you put it in play. So yeah, I would if you have a single edict effect, this is probably the best one that you could have.
Yep, I'm there.
Okay.
All right, that'll bring us to Tarak, Dread Cantor. 1 and a black for a 2/1, a legendary human cleric. It has kicker for black. Protection from white. Whenever an opponent discards a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Turok. When Turok enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, target opponent discards 2 cards at random. A lot of things I don't like about this card. I think protection generally has pretty bad gameplay. I think Hymn to Turok generally has pretty bad gameplay. I think cards that cost 4 mana and 3 of it is the same color is pretty bad gameplay. But a lot of people love Hymn to Turok. A lot of people like having mono black decks in their cubes. A lot of people don't mind the existence of protection, and this card is for those people.
Yes, I am those people, and I will be putting this card into my cube. That being said, I agree with everything that Ryan said. I strongly dislike protection. The chances you cast this on turn 4 is almost none, unless you're playing a mono black deck, in which you will probably really, really need to because you have decided to play mono black. But I do like... I do just like this card. And I think that it probably plays worse than it looks, because this card is going to be significantly better in constructed, where you are able to make sure that your mana meets the requirements it needs. But in cube, this is like best case scenario. I mean, this is not far off from Phyrexian Obliterator mana cost.
Yeah. And the ceiling, it's not difficult to imagine this card being a 4 mana 4/3 and your opponent discards their last 2 cards. Like that's going to happen. Or just with the random nature of the discard, you're just going to hit their best card a decent clip if you can cast it. Something that Sam Black pointed out on Twitter that made me really mad. And so now I need to share it so y'all can share in my anger. This card apparently in playtesting was named Tarak of the Ebenhand, which is a reference to Knight of the Ebenhand. And it's just a 2/1 with pro white, and that would have been a really good reference. Instead, it's called whatever it's called that I'm going to forget every time immediately after reading it.
Yeah, I was wondering why it had pro white. There's the only thing that Turok is associated with is like hymn to Turok largely.
Mm-hmm.
So they,
Like
I think I'm slowly getting around to what you were. There's like
if they missed it, that'd be one thing. If they just didn't think of that name, but the fact that they had it and then moved away from it for this much worse name is upsetting.
Also would have made more sense because they just left the pro white on there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's dumb. Thanks, Ryan.
You're welcome.
While we're on the subject of anyway, so I guess to close thoughts on this, we like we were talking about, we hate pips, and this is just littered with them. They're just all over the card.
Yep.
Like I said, I'm gonna try this in a cube because I really like the card, but I don't expect it to perform at its ceiling very often, if ever.
Right.
A note on him to Turok, because I always like to make sure that this is clear. The best hymn to Turok is the Homelands Liz Danforth art, which is the 4 druids in the circle.
Ooh, I'm Team Wolf.
Yeah, I knew you'd be Team Wolf. I just had a feeling. As long as you're not team people
Eternal
at the table.
Masters. Team from the Vault 20.
Yeah, well, I mean, now I will say that all that new art, the Eternal Masters art, is based on the best art, which is the Liz Danforth art. Because it is druids in a circle summoning something out of the ground. Which so the art director, when they got Greg Staples to do the new one, identified the correct old one to base it off of. So, point in my favor.
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have a mental image of the new art. So, whatever you say, that's canon now.
You're just going to say, okay,
yeah.
Great. All right. Another card for lower rarity cubes, Tragic Fall, 1 and a black, is an instant. Target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. If you are hellbent, meaning you have no cards in your hand, or this is the last card in your hand and you cast it, that creature gets -13/-13 instead. I mean, this is last gasp with upside. If you're basically how I envision this is you are getting ready to lose the game to a large creature and you top deck this because you had no other cards in your hand previously, and then you get to kill it for 2. But otherwise, this is just another 2-mana black removal spell that's mediocre.
Yeah, just an upgrade over basically a Pauper Cube staple. So take a card that's playable and make it better. Would you believe it's still playable?
Yeah, probably so.
All right, next up we have a Vile Entomber, 2 black, 2/2, a zombie warlock with Death Touch. When Vile Entomber enters the battlefield, search your library for a card and put it into your graveyard, then shuffle. So it's a Entomber, and it entombs.
Right on the card, says it there.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't mess with this if you're talking about a high-powered cube. That's why we have it custom over classic. But in a peasant cube, maybe you're trying to bring back some stuff with the 4 or more mana reanimate spells, and specifically Violent Tumor being able to grab Unburial Rites could be pretty rad in a pinch.
Yep.
This card just seems nice for peasant cubes.
Yeah, I also love that this has Death Touch. I think that's the exact right keyword to put on it, because you just want to, because it is expensive for the body that it's providing for those cubes. You just want to be able to slam it down to set up your next turn. And this is going to be able to block and trade with something immediately after you do that. So because this has Death Touch, I'm very much more on board. Unburial Rites was the exact card that I was thinking of, because in a that is, in my opinion, generally one of the more powerful cards in a Pauper Cube. So being able to kind of turn that in, or if you have the Unburial Rites in your hand, being able to combo some portion of your game plan together while putting a roadblock creature in play, I think is a good deal.
Yep.
Okay, and the last one that we have for custom is a young Necromancer. This is 4 and a black for a 3/2 human warlock. I'm finally getting the warlocks in. Human warlock creature. When young Necromancer enters the battlefield, you may exile 2 cards from your graveyard. When you do, return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. A lot to like about this card. It does require you to exile 2 other cards, but it returns any creature with no restriction. It does not cost you any life to do it, and it does not come into play tapped. It just does the thing. So if you are, I imagine, especially like in limited in this set, going Violent Tumor, just in actual Modern Horizons 2 limited, going Violent Tumor into young Necromancer, I imagine will be a relatively common line of play to do that.
Yeah.
The exile 2 cards means you can't like loop this over and over because you'll run out of resources, but I imagine that's exactly why this is on here.
Yeah, you'll run out if you are in a position to play a grindy game, but the big upside is you get more meaningful value when you're really behind when it comes time to zombify, because the fear, certainly in a peasant who's a low power cube, is you get back your thing and the opponent like Oblivion rings it or just dispatches the creature and continues attacking you. The extra 2/3 won't completely save you, but it'll stem the bleeding a little bit so you can set up again.
Yes, definitely. You can also Revelark this, which is cool if you have a cube to do that. Yeah. So you can Revelark, get this back, and then get back a bigger thing. So anything that can Revelark, always keep that in the back of my mind.
All right, and that brings us to the cards that don't require much discussion, generally going to be pretty obvious if and where you want this. We'll start with Feast of Sanity, 3 and a black for an enchantment. Whenever you discard a card, Feast of Sanity deals 1 damage to any target and you gain 1 life. So if you're doing some kind of thing where you're discarding, it could be madness. Maybe you're doing some kind of weird Megrim stuff. I don't know. People do all kinds of stuff with their cubes, but if this is of interest to you and you read it, you would know it.
And in a similar vein, the next card, Hell Mongrel, 3 and a black for a 4/3 Nightmare Dog. Discard a card, Hell Mongrel gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and it has madness for 2 and a black. Just mentioning this because this is another madness card that is also a madness enabler because it lets you discard cards. So if you have a low powered cube that is working with madness, this might be a card you're actually interested in because it plays both sides of the ball.
Definitely.
Also has great art, by the way.
It is really creepy. All right, our next card is Radiant Epicure for 4 and a black. We have a 5/5 Vampire Wizard, relevant that it costs 4 generic mana because it has Converge. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast this spell. So your peasant cube that's playing with tri-lands, not uncommon that you can make 3 to 5 colors of mana. You get a 5/5 for 5, big deal in these cubes. You can drain your opponent for up to 5, also a big deal in these cubes.
Yeah, this card has the potential to be a pretty wild swing. I imagine this card is also quite good in Modern Horizons 2 Limited, because it seems quite easy to do the converging thing. But like playing this is, look, I know an uncommon Siege Rhino when I see one. Okay. That's exactly what this is in a peasant cube. This is just Siege Rhino. It costs 1 more mana, but Siege Rhino all the same. The next card that we have, Sinister Starfish, which is a playoff of Sigiled Starfish. It's a 1 and a black. It is a creature starfish, of course, an 0/3, and you can tap it to Surveil. So Surveil, as a reminder, is look at the top card of your library. You can put it into your graveyard if you want, or leave it on top. For a lower powered cube, I think this is something that's nice to be able to just fill your graveyard up, quite simply.
Yeah. And if you're trying to like just tone down the stuff that gives you all 2-for-1s all the time, this is good start card selection that, you know, it builds up your threshold. Maybe you mill stuff that flashes back. So some cool applications there.
Yep. Yeah. Pretty simple.
All right, then we have Underworld Hermit, 4 black, 3/3 human peasant. When Underworld Hermit enters the battlefield, create a number of 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens equal to your devotion to black. So a squirrel for each of your black pips. And I don't like a lot of pips on one card. I like mini pips spread over many cards, and this card is going to pay you off for doing that.
Yeah, yeah, and getting creatures is pretty solid. And this is similar to the there's a white version of this card from Theros.
Is it,
but I believe
something of Heliod? Is it Evangel of Heliod, or is that a different card?
I think
like that.
I think that is actually right. But the body is not as good. It's a 1/3. It's exactly the same card. It's just a 1/3, and you get soldiers instead of squirrels. And this is just a 3/3. So there you go. If you're doing the devotion thing, or maybe just a tokens thing, because you don't really need to have a ton of devotion to get a decent spread of creatures for this.
Yep.
Okay, next up, Vermin Gorger, 1 and a black. It is a 2/2 creature vampire. Tap and sacrifice another creature. Each opponent loses 2 and you gain 2. For a low-powered cube, if you're interested in doing the sacrificing thing, that's a decent chunk of life to drain. It does tap to sacrifice to do that effect. So you really do want it to be a lower-powered or pauper cube, but this is another tool that you have for just commons.
Yeah, and the battlefield tends to get pretty bogged down in cubes like that. So this is a way to get some damage off of your non-evasive creatures.
Yep, and you don't have to do it as a sorcery, which I really like. So you can just do it at end of turn or like in combat after you've blocked with a token.
For sure. And then the last black card we'll be talking about today, World Weary, 3 black for an aura that enchants a creature. Enchanted creature gets -4/-4, and it has basic land cycling for 1 and a black. So inefficient removal spell. It is the cost that you generally pay for basic land cycling. So nice card you can play. If there's some delirium stuff going on, it is an enchantment that can be a harder type too. So some stuff to like for lower powered cubes.
Yeah, I really just like all of these basic land cycling cards. We're probably going to talk about the rest of them too.
Yep.
All right. Ryan, any other notes on black cards before we move on to red for today?
I mean, that wasn't enough.
Well, I think we left 2 or 3 on the sheet. So
all right. Yeah, we didn't touch on every card, but we did touch on a lot of cards, and so far we'll see if this holds. But black has had the most classically powerful cards.
It certainly has. All right, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in just a moment. Have some extra cards laying around that you want to get rid of? Go to starcitygames.com/sell. It has never been easier to turn your cards into cash. Or if you're looking to outfit your cube or commander deck with some new favorites, get a 30% trade-in bonus when you choose store credit. No matter what your collection looks like, we have a method for you. Want to see exactly what every card you have is worth? Check out our buy list. Don't have time for that? Stick it on a box. Send it to us, and we'll make you an offer with our ship and sell program. Or if you want a more personal touch, make your way to the Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia to sit down with a buyer just like the old days. With the fastest turnaround time in the industry, get an offer in under 4 days when you go to starcitygames.com/sell. Selling has never been easier.
Hello there from Dominario's Judgment, a weekly podcast for Star City Games with me, Dom Harvey.
And me, Ari Lex.
Where we bring you the latest, greatest, and downright weirdest things Modern has to offer.
Want to know what to expect for next weekend's events? We've got you covered.
Do you want deep breakdowns of the hot topics and decks in Modern? We've got you covered.
Just want to make sure you don't miss the latest nonsense before your opponents teach you a lesson about it in the queues? Oh yeah, we have definitely got you covered.
And when Modern Horizons 2 blows the ceiling off this format, as it surely will, we'll be here with you to pick up the pieces.
Find us every week on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Or if you want to head over to starcitygames.com, we'll be right there alongside all the great content from all your other favorite content producers.
All right, so Modern Horizons 2 red cards. We talked about a ton of black ones. Red also has some pretty nice ones.
Yeah, there's some heaters. And I'm going to open things up with a card that I think I'm going to have to justify being classically powerful, because if you haven't played with it yet, it might not be obviously there. I think a number of us are there. I don't know your position currently, but it's a card that does require a little bit of finesse anyway. But we'll be starting with Dragon's Rage Channeler, a 1-mana 1/1 human shaman. For 1 red mana, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, surveil 1. So just like the Starfish, you look at your top card and you can put it into your graveyard or leave it on top. And then if you have Delirium, if you have 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, it gets +2/+2, has flying, and it attacks each combat if able. I've joked about this card because I've started playing with it in Modern. I say when I read that line, it continues to attack each combat. And Delirium in a red deck, that might sound like a little bit of an ask. That might sound like an ask if you're not supporting it. Typically, if you see Delirium in a cube, they're doing stuff like putting in Mishra's Bauble and maybe like Seal of Fire over a different burn spell, a dead weight. So kind of giving you more kind of oddball tools. But when it comes to Dragon's Rage Channeler, the comparison I'll make, and this is again for people who are old and have been playing for a long time, but when Tarmogoyf really hit the scene and was heavily played in Legacy, the card still shows up some in Constructed, but it's not what it used to be. But when you were counting the size of a Tarmogoyf, instant sorcery creature land, those were called the easy ones. It was pretty common for Tarmogoyf just to be a 4/5 in most games. And Dragon's Rage Channeler only checks your graveyard, but this Surveil 1 with every instant and sorcery, which your red deck's going to have. You're going to be trying to get your lightning bolts, your chain lightnings, a number of just good burn spells that you'll pretty happily cast if they're also sculpting your draw. Like in a lot of games, eventually the chain lightning and the lightning bolts go upstairs anyway. When you get this extra card filtering with the Surveil, you put it there. And Dragon's Rage Channeler is not as big as a lot of the other 1-mana creatures on turn 1. You won't always have that set up, but when it gets up to the 3/3, it hits harder than most of them. And when you top deck it in the later game, that flying evasion, when we're talking about top decking in the later game for these red aggressive decks, you generally will have Delirium. And in a classically powerful cube, you also open up pretty easy access to land because these decks usually want to play Strip Mine and or Wasteland, or like your Mishra's Factory Mutavault can be destroyed somehow. So you'll get those lands in the graveyard naturally. Like you can just get these card types, even if the Channeler is not necessarily the card putting them there. And I think this card probably plays a lot better than initially reads. Obviously, Constructed is not cube, but basically every time I've opened this card on turn 1 in Modern and gotten to turn 2 with it uncontested, I have been attacking with Delirium that turn.
That's pretty impressive. You do not have to sell me as much on this card. I am a huge fan of this card. I think this card is excellent. I will only add a couple of other things to what Ryan had said. I think when a lot of people look at this card, they automatically link the two abilities together intrinsically, saying, okay, well, I need to cast non-creature spells so I can Surveil to put things into my graveyard to make sure that I have Delirium. I think that while that is true, I think that is the narrowest way to look at this. And this also is an aggressive creature that you play early in the game ahead of your non-creature spells that essentially gives all of your non-creature spells Scry 1, but Surveil is better than Scry because it allows you to interact with your graveyard even outside of the Dragon Rage Channeler. Mm-hmm. And that's a portion of this card that I've not heard people talk about in isolation that's incredibly powerful, but it is. Anytime you cast a non-creature spell, if you just added Scry 1 to that, a lot of spells get significantly better, and that's without the context of turning this into a 3/3 with flying.
It's also just generally true that the red aggressive deck in cube, like ideally you have the best 1-drop in your deck on turn 1, but more than that, it is such a huge miss if you don't have any 1-drop. Like, yes. I will take Raging Goblin if that's within the cube. I need to be doing something early.
Need to have a 1-drop period. Yeah, I need to play to the board. I think this is actually one of the... It's crazy because I think that there were 2 premier 1-drops for red prior to this set, and now there are 4, which is a huge deal. And I include Dragon Rage Channeler as one of those 4.
Yeah, I am there as well.
All right, yeah. Another card that I am a very big fan of this version as well as its Papa, and that's Dragon, not Dragon at all. That's the last card, Flametongue Yearling. Red, it is a creature. Kavu is a 2/1, but it has a multi-kicker of 2, so you can pay 2 generic mana at any number of times. And it enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter for each time it was kicked, and when it enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to its powered target creature. So I want to first look at this card at its base rate, because I believe that's going to be what it's going to be cast at more frequently than not. So Flametongue Yearling as a 2/1 for red, that when it enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature. This is pretty even with the card Fire Imp, which is a 2/1 for 2 and a red, that when it enters the battlefield, it deals 2 to a creature. This costs red, so its casting cost is relatively even with Flame Imp that cost 2 and a red, and this costs red. But the fact that you can scale this for basically as much mana as you have whenever you draw it later in the game, as well as cast it for it's just 2. We've just not seen a card that has this rate since Flame Imp, and in context, you could technically play this on turn 2 and just kill a creature. And I think just from that perspective, this is just a slam dunk in every single cube. The upside is just astronomically high for the type of card that you want, which is a red creature that kills another creature and provides a meaningful 2 power body left around.
Yeah, the thing that puts it over is the multi-kicker, of course. The fact that it can scale into the late game, like red, only doing the base of this creature. It's not necessarily still powerful when you get to it. The multi-kicker helps bridge that gap, makes the ability more powerful, makes the body larger. And then also just the case where this is a classic thing in Magic. I'm on the play with my red deck. I play, say, a turn 1 Dragon's Rage Channeler. You open up on Birds of Paradise. I have a 2-mana creature and a lightning bolt in my hand. Well, we talk about bolting the bird a lot. There's a real cost, though. I can't play my 2-drop if I have to use my removal spell on your Birds of Paradise without weighing into, what side you're on, whether you bolt the bird or you're wrong. Flametongue Yearling lets you play your 2-mana creature and kill the Birds of Paradise, which is just a huge swing for you.
Yeah. Something else that is pretty ubiquitous among all cubes is that creatures have a higher power than toughness on a very regular basis. Because generally, more powerful creatures over the course of Magic have that setup where they have a higher power than toughness. So something like Flametongue Yearling is actually able to trade up more frequently than it would in regular constructed Magic because of that ubiquity of low toughness across all cubes. And that's not just for higher powered cubes, that's for lower powered cubes too. So, yeah, just a really great card all the way around.
All right, our next card is Fiori. This is the red member of our Elemental Incarnation pitch cycle. Costs 3 red for a 3/3 with double strike. When Fiori enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage, divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers. It evokes by exiling a red card from your hand. So, this does not necessarily go into your red beatdown deck. Maybe if it's your only 5-drop, you can justify it sometimes. And, when it comes to facing down Courser of Krufix, your beatdown deck will be cool evoking this a number of times. But then just the games where you get into 5 mana, trying to hold your opponent off, and this can clean up creatures, deal a lot of damage to a planeswalker. I don't know, it's not always the most efficient thing, but this ability is clearly very powerful.
Yeah, so it took me a couple of times looking at this card and really thinking about it within what I believe is how it would play out. I think that if on the face that this is probably the second to last least powerful member of this cycle. And I'm not even 100% sure that it's not last on its face. But with how this generally plays out, I would actually say that I'm going to play this card in my deck, in a red deck, a pretty high percentage of the time because of exactly what you are talking about, which is having stuff line up poorly from a blocking perspective. When your opponent has an opportunity to block, I think comes up pretty frequently. And this is a card that pushes a significant amount of damage just on the face of being a pyrokinesis, which is essentially what this card is. but it's a pyrokinesis that if you play it on turn 5, you can kill a creature and then have a meaningful threat left behind, as opposed to a pyrokinesis where that's the only thing that it does. So even though this is like it's less powerful, I think, directly than some of the other elemental incarnations in the cycle, creatures with come to play abilities are just most of the time better than the ones that don't have them.
Yep.
And the fact that this can also hit planeswalkers is not irrelevant, because one of the most annoying things in a red deck specifically, I would say more than any other kind of deck in a cube, is having to overcommit damage to kill a planeswalker. Like if a planeswalker has 4 loyalty and I have to attack it with 2 2/2s, I'm losing a point of damage to kill that planeswalker, but I have to kill the planeswalker.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing when like people talk about planeswalkers gaining so much life. It's almost tongue-in-cheek in most matchups. It's like, who really cares? But when you're talking about your opponent playing a red deck and their creatures being kind of expendable and generally not long from this world, like that life matters.
Yeah, for sure. And outside of an aggressive deck, once you start considering this card as a mid-range card, and you're putting it into a mid-range deck, even like a Jund or a Grixis deck in a cube, I think that's where this card is at its best. Mm-hmm. Where you've been able to handle the board, and this is not something where you're trying to push damage, but you're actually trying to catch up and put something into play that has to be answered. I feel like if you are casting this and getting a 2-for-1 and then leaving this body behind, you are going to be a huge favorite in just about any game that you're playing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I really start to turn and say, okay, well, now I actually quite like this card, because I think that's where it's going to be played the most.
Yep. Yeah, it's not an ace in every matchup, but there are matchups where it is. And it just kind of, I mean, technically it does what Pyrokinesis does, but you wouldn't really put Pyrokinesis in most cubes. The fact that this is the 3/3 double strike matters. That puts it over in other spots.
Definitely. All right, what do we have next?
We have Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer for 1 red mana. It's a legendary 2/1 monkey pirate. We've seen this token before, but the token didn't have these abilities. When Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token and exile the top card of that player's library. Until end of turn, you may cast that card, and it has dash for 1 and a red. And I want to clarify something. This is just partly for my sanity, because other people seem totally floored by this card. I think it's clearly very powerful. I think it's a little overblown. You can't cast the spell with mana of any color. The treasure is giving you access to mana of any color, but you won't always be able to cast a spell. This is not the same as other effects like Gonti we've seen, where you can just use mana however you want. You do have to be able to use the treasure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All the same, 1 mana 2/1 with this much upside, like this is just such a cube slam dunk. And I think a lot of people hate it when the red deck is good in cube. I love it when the red deck is good in cube. Like, losing is losing, winning is winning. With the red deck, it's at least fast either way. So I have no qualms with the red deck being good. And I don't think that the red deck has been anywhere near as good as it has been historically in recent years. I think the tools against the red decks have gotten a lot better than the red decks themselves. So giving red a couple potential runaway options, I think, is awesome and a good upgrade to high power cubes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Ragavan would be powerful enough to hit this classic designation with 2 of these 3 abilities.
Well, really. I mean, part of that just goes back to what we said about Dragon's Rage Channeler and just the nature of red decks. Like, it costs 1 and it has power and toughness.
Yep. Yeah, I think this card is great. Zergo Bellstriker in shambles right now, though.
that is true. I mean, some people are talking about this card like, I cannot believe that they made a 1 mana 2/1 that good. It's like, they made everything else that good. What do you want?
Why can you not believe it?
Why they made Uro and they made Oko and they made all this other shit, but I can't believe they finally made a good red card.
Red 1-drop, unbelievable. They get everything every 6 years. They get one thing. How dare you? How dare you follow up something 6 years later after Monastery Swiftspear that red has something notable?
Every burn spell only hits creatures and planeswalkers, and it's just like I can't believe they actually made a playable red card.
I know. That's how I feel. I do think this card is great. I'm very excited to cast this card in Legacy.
Yeah.
This card is nuts in Legacy.
I definitely could see this card being a problem in Legacy.
Yeah,
and a lot
this
of that
card is nuts there.
Yeah, this is something that's kind of worth talking about. Like it's something that really applies to us, but like this card is very similar to Dreadhorde Arcanist, which was this huge tipping point in Legacy where like protecting your Delver of Secrets with Force of Will kind of sucks. Like something else bad is going to happen, but like your Dreadhorde Arcanist will get to attack and replace itself. Your Ragavan will get to attack and replace itself. So like there's the tipping point going on there. When you don't have free counter spells all the time, like Ragavan's really bad against 1/1 creature. Like you have to answer everything to get this creature through. So I don't see it being a problem. It's gonna run away with some games, but like I don't know, put some shit that can block in your deck, okay?
Yeah,
like be an adult about it.
If someone goes Ragavan and you go the card Sprout from Time Spiral, that puts a 1/1 Sapperling onto the battlefield, Ryan.
Yeah,
Ragavan now has a huge problem.
You're in trouble.
You are in big trouble.
Hunted Witness, would you like to sign the slip? I don't think you can beat this one.
Yeah. So I think that Ragavan I think it's a great card. I think it's an easy classic card, but it's certainly not. This is not the crazy thing that people are saying.
Like, so it's really easy to understand how this card is much better than Jackal Pup. This is actually the opposite thing. We were talking about Profane Tutor. Like, here's an awesome card and a worse version of an awesome card. It's still awesome. It's like, here's a shitty card and a better version of I cannot believe they made a better version of that shitty card. Can you believe?
I can't believe after 23 years we've upgraded Jackal Pup. Yeah, come on. Yeah, this card's great. We've talked about the aggro problem before with aggressive cards in any cube, where in constructed you get to have 4 of this card. In cube you get to have 1. You can't build your deck around having Ragavan on turn 1 and being able to continually hit your opponent and make treasures and cast all of their spells. That's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like every once in a while it's going to, because they can't answer your 2/1, but realistically, this is just another great thing to cast on turn 1. And at some point in the first 3 turns of the game, it's probably going to die, having put 4 or 6 damage in play. And that's really all you want.
Yep.
All right. I think that's the last classic card that we have.
Yeah. The classic a little deeper for red than black.
Yes. The classic a little deeper for black than red.
Right, yeah, sorry, I misspoke.
Yes. So, okay. All right, next up we have, so we're now into our custom category. So this is something that's not going to fit every single cube, but all of the following cards will fit into some cubes. So the first one we have is Battle Plan. And this is a 3 and a red enchantment. At the beginning of your combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So it's a little battle rattle shaman type deal. But it also has basic land cycling for 1 and a red. As we were talking about with all of the rest of the basic land cycling, this is just a great card to have. And I actually like this card more than some of the other ones, because I think this is a more playable effect that you will actually cast rather than basic land cycling, where I feel like the basic land cycling on the rest of them is probably going to happen more frequently. And I think this one is probably pretty close to even for lower powered cubes.
I'm glad we're on the same page. Battle Rattle Shaman is a card that I used to clean up with in my Pauper cube, and it's been some time. Maybe it hasn't aged as well, but like having that ability on an enchantment, just having that kind of pump every turn in a way that's harder to interact with, like I definitely see this card showing up in Pauper cubes and being a real card that you cast.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, because like we talked about before, enchantments are by among I mean probably the most difficult card type to destroy, where Battle Rattle Shaman is great, and that is on a 2/2 creature, which is almost as fragile as you can get. And that card is incredibly powerful. And this is just going to turn any of your creatures into meaningful threats. Mm-hmm. So having the upside of basic land cycling is just that, but I expect to cast Battle Plan more frequently than I would cast its basic land cycling partners in this set.
Yeah. All right. Previously, you said that said about one of the, I think it was Necrogoyf. You said it was probably the most madness-y card we were going to talk about, but
I might be wrong.
Yeah, this next card is my pick for the most madness-y card we're going to talk about today. It is Blazing Rootwalla. For 1 red mana, you get a 1/1 lizard. It has Madness 0, so a reference to Basking Rootwalla, and the rest of the card also kind of referential there. For 1 red mana, Blazing Rootwalla gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Activate only once each turn. So this card a little bit closer to home in the Madness decks. This one's a slam dunk for Spooky Cube. The green cards that were part of the standard blue-green Madness deck, they all still exist, but we continue to see red and black cards that have discard matters that care about Madness, and red is really the primary color for Madness, and this card is showing up in Modern already, often alongside Asmarana Markadiced in a Kuldakar. And yeah, I mean, Madness 0, if you are trying to get spells for value discarding cards, 0 is the right price. You can't get a better deal than that.
This card not only showing up in Modern, showing up in every Eternal format.
Yeah, Vintage with your Bazaars.
Yeah, Basking Rootwalla was already a staple in Vintage because of that. So this is just another one.
This is also just like if you're trying to just have like a little spin on your beatdown deck, you don't necessarily have to be doing Madness things to just put this card in a red deck. Just like we were talking about with just 1-drops in red. Like this is just a 1-drop in red that can hit for 3, which
can and will often.
Yeah, like this will show up in some decks that can perform all right that don't care about Madness, which is kind of nice.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I have cast. Oh my gosh, it's the 1-drop goblin that has Mentor, Goblin Banneret in Cube, and been reasonably happy with it before. And that, even though it's a 1/1 with Mentor, its ability to pump it +2/+0, which you could do more than once, it costs 2 to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this only costs 1, so this is still gonna it's still gonna hit for 3, which is the same that Goblin Banneret does in most cases. So this is even outside of Madness. You would not put this in your cube, I think, if you were not focusing on the fact that it has Madness. But sometimes I'll just cast this on turn 1 and just start beating down.
Yeah, the fact that it can show up even if you don't care about Madness, or just, you draw it and you're not set up for Madness yet, that makes it more compelling. There's more things you can do with it, which is cool. You won't put it in your cube if you don't care about the Madness portion, but it will get drafted as though it did not have it more frequently than other cards that you put in there for the same reason. Exactly.
That's a plus card for that. So the next card, I think that this card I think people are under the impression this is just like a slam dunk card, and I think that this card is quite mediocre, but we'll see how Brian feels about it. Bloodbraid Marauder. 1 and a red for a 3/1, and a Bloodbraid Marauder cannot block. It is a human berserker. Now, if you have Delirium, which means you have 4 unique card types in your graveyard, this spell has Cascade, but it's a 2-drop.
Mm-hmm.
So, unlike other cards with Cascade, which, are going to potentially give you something that is more meaningful, this is always going to get a 1-drop or perhaps a 0-drop, depending on what sort of nonsense you have in your cube. Is that good?
So the thing about this card is, unlike Dragon's Rage Channeler, you will want to be doing Delirium things to justify putting this card in your cube at least. I don't expect this to show up in cubes that don't also feature at least Mishra's Bauble and probably a couple other quirky cards. The other comparison you can make, though, is in Arena Cube, and if you're working on a cube that's like a similar power level, like some restriction brings you there, Rimrock Knight is a card that I draft relatively highly in my red decks and just cast it on turn 2 a reasonable amount of time, and this is the same card as that when you do that. If you're never cascading with it, then it's clearly a worse card. Like Rimrock Knight always gives you something, and it can convert into damage, so you do care about that something. Whereas, again, you probably do need to actually be putting this in a cube that's like also facilitating the use of Grim Flayer and other aggressive Delirium cards. getting a 1 mana card or a 0 mana card, often not a big deal. You know, if you turn on the Cascade and you Cascade in the Mishra's Bauble, whatever. But, you know, a 2 mana creature with a good amount of power that replaces itself, like the Mishra's Bauble will draw you a card. That's real. It's less real if your cube has a lot of powerful top end. You know, that value is not going to make up for the fact that most of the time this is a 2 mana 3/1 that can't block and has no other text.
Yeah.
But there are environments where I could see you wanting this card.
So this, to me, one, I'm annoyed this is a rare. I wish this was not a rare. I would be a little warmer on this card. Two, this is the type of card that I feel like when you're in the draft, you're like, I could use a 2-drop that I can aggressively attack with, and this fits the bill. But as a cube designer, this is a tough sell for me to put into the cube, even if I'm doing the delirium things. Because I think on turn 2, this is a below average 2-drop that you would largely never put into a cube. And the only reason that this is even an acceptable card at all is because, like, later in the game when you can activate delirium, it does a really other tiny thing. But I don't think that the base level card is good enough to put into a cube just on its own.
It's not exciting. It's one that I'm thinking about for some stuff.
It's a 2-drop that's not best on turn 2.
Yeah, I mean, like, being a human is another consideration. There's like all these small peripheral things. You're right. Like, it is a 2-drop that's not at its best on turn 2. So it takes something pretty specific. I think that if you're just looking at this card and saying, I want to put this in my cube because this is a good cube card, then you're setting yourself up for disappointment. But
yeah,
I can't imagine the framework that does make this card pretty fun and powerful.
I think this card would be... It's just one of those cards that I've talked about before that, like, when you're in the draft or like at the end, you're like, oh, you know what card I would wish I could put in this deck? Bloodbraid Marauder would be pretty cool in this deck, but it's never a card that I feel like I'm going to want to make room for in my cube because I think that the floor is low. And I don't like putting low floor cards into the cube.
Sure.
I don't know. I'm being too harsh on it.
I do think that there is something, this is not true of a lot of cubes. We talked about like Arena Cube before. I said that it's the cubes that I've played where 2 mana 3/1 just is the best I've ever seen that rate on a creature be. Yeah. And there's just like, I can imagine there being a cube where that sort of thing is true. And also it's doing like a Mishra's Bauble deadweight thing. And I can imagine this card being a card that makes decks in a cube like that.
Okay. That's fair enough. What do we have next?
That's all pretty abstract, but anyway, next we have Brea's Apprentice, 2 and a red, 2/3 artifact creature, human artificer. When Brea's Apprentice enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Tap, sacrifice an artifact, choose one. You can exile the top card of your library until end of turn. Until end of your next turn, rather, you may play that card. Or target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So, I mean, this is 2 artifacts for 1 card. Yeah, I always love to see that if you're doing artifact things.
Yep.
It's a little awkward that it's tapped to use these abilities, especially tapped to only pump power. That's an attacking kind of thing. So you have a creature that can like be okay attacking, but like not if it itself is attacking. So that's whatever. You can turn an artifact into a spell from the top of your deck, or I guess a card that you can play for the next 2 turns. You can convert some value that way. Mostly I see this card as 1 card that's 2 artifacts, and it's not very exciting beyond that.
Yeah. Like the immediate comparison is PNLR for this card. And if I'm comparing those two, I like PNLR better because it does the thing that I probably want to do, which is provide 2 bodies and be able to aggressively attack. This does provide 2 artifacts. I don't know if either of them are worth the price of admission, other than the fact that they are 2 artifacts. I'm really turned off by the tap ability here. Now, I get it, because if it's not a tap ability, if it's like pay 1 and do it, I think that this could end up being a problematic card in other formats. Now, I was saying I'm willing to sacrifice other formats for the case of Cube, but I don't know if that would be meaningful enough even for Cube to be worth it, because in Cube, maybe I do want to pay 0 and tap it and only use it once a turn rather than just pay 1 mana. But I don't know. I'm pretty split on this card. I feel like it's a 2/3 that just never gets into combat.
I think that as is, I'm really cold on this card, even for very specialized cubes. You can put it in, you can not. I think it goes pretty late. I think that it generally is, worse than PNLR. And I think that if it costs 1 instead of tapping, I can't even really imagine it being a problem for constructed. So I'm kind of cold on this design.
Yeah, I am too. Yeah. I don't really have a whole lot else to say. I certainly don't want to defend it anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Next up, we have Calibrated Blast. Now, there's a lot of text on this card, so I'm going to lean into my monitor because it's all very small. Instant, 2 and red. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land card. Put the revealed card on the bottom of your library. Put the revealed cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. When you reveal a non-land card this way, Calibrated Blast deals damage equal to that card's mana value to any target. So this is like an erratic explosion. However, it also has flashback for 3 red. Now, I think you have to be in a quirky cube for this to be something you're interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I've never played a cube that features Kaboom Draco, but I've always kind of wanted to.
This is another one that lets you do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a really specific thing, but it's rad. And I encourage anybody that wants to support this.
I would be excited if I saw this in someone's cube.
Definitely.
I would be actively interested in drafting it. One of my friends, John Suarez, is the biggest erratic explosion fan that I know, and he's very excited about this card to be able to do it twice in a single card. He's a big Draco explosion type of guy.
I love that.
Yeah. All right. What do we have next up?
We have Captain Ripley Vance, 2 and a red, 3/2, legendary human pirate. Whenever you cast your 3rd spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Captain Ripley Vance. Then it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So casting 3 spells a turn is tough, and there's a lot that's more powerful than this that you can be doing if you're casting 3 spells a turn. But if we're talking about a peasant cube, this is a card that could theoretically, in certain situations, put your opponent in the squeeze. If you have this in a bunch of stuff, I don't know, if you have chromatic spheres and stars and a bunch of stuff that just replaces itself, or even if you just fire it off once, then it's a 3 mana card that becomes an FTK on turn 4 and is attacking on turn 4. So it's pretty specific. It's not actually that powerful. There's a really good chance it dies before it can do its thing, but its thing is powerful when it goes off in these environments.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it equal to its power, it's going to be 4 at minimum. That's a pretty big chunk.
Yeah.
You don't need to do this too many times to get the price of admission for what you're looking for out of this card.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it goes off once, this card's excellent.
You've done it. Yeah, exactly.
I think going off once is very hard, but if you do it, then this card is really good in a peasant cube.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is so we've talked about Storm and how we feel like it's largely a trap. This is a low-level Storm card that has a high fail rate because at the worst, you end up with a 3/2 for 3.
Yeah. And I think that Storm was something I supported in my Pauper Cube, and it's something you can have in Peasant Cube. It looks a lot different than Storm in Vintage and Legacy Cube, right?
Yes,
you
for
are
sure.
trying to empty the Warrens for however many you can get. And it's pretty common that it's suspend Riftbolt, and then on turn 4, make 4 goblins. That's what the Storm deck looks like. So with a lot of just small things, some suspend stuff that generates marginal value, cards with flashback that are pretty weak effects, you can tailor your cube to have some okay kind of cool Storm turns, and Captain Ripley Vance would be very good in that style of deck and that style of cube.
This set specifically really does a lot to assist if you are trying to go into Storm. because it provides some low level cards, especially at common uncommon rarities, that are there to help that. Not the payoff cards, but the get you there cards.
Yes.
Okay, the next card we have is flavorfully one of my favorite cards in the set. Really everything about it. It's actually just a great card. Chef's Kiss. 1 red as an instant. Gain control of target spell that targets only a single permanent or player. Copy it, then reselect the targets at random for the spell and the copy. The new targets can't be you or a permanent you control. So, to put this into logical terms, someone casts a spell, you cast Chef's Kiss, you gain control of that spell, you copy it, and then you choose 2 random targets, 1 for each of the spells. They could technically be the same target, which would be unfortunate in some cases, but it's 2 random targets, and it won't ever be anything that's yours or something you control, so the outcome can't be bad.
This is a hilarious commander card.
Oh, it's awesome in Commander. This is excellent in Commander and a multiplayer cube. It is. Chef's Kiss is perfect. It says it right there on the card.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I expected to show up. And if you're just kind of into having some quirky tricks in your cube, I've played cubes where I would believe this card showing up, and I could see it doing pretty cool stuff, even in 1-versus-1 environments.
There was, not recently, but there was many moons ago where I had the card Wild Ricochet in my cube. And this is close to Wild Ricochet. It's not random, but it does cost 1 less. So I actually think in it's clearly a slam dunk in multiplayer cubes. That's easy. But even in non-multiplayer cubes, if you're looking for something like just a lower power level card that's going to be fun, that's going to create great moments, this card is going to do it pretty much every time.
Definitely. All right, our next card is Faithless Salvaging. 1 and a red, it's an instant. Discard a card, then draw a card. Notably, discard a card on resolution. This is not a cost, so if you're empty-handed, this will draw a card.
Yep.
And then it has rebound, so you're going to cast it again at the beginning of your next upkeep. It's kind of a nice discard outlet. It can just be a card that lets you rummage twice. It can be a card that if you find yourself empty-handed, actually ends up breaking even there. And it's a spell over 2 turns. That can be a thing that can contribute to the low power cube storm deck we were talking about. Rebound, exactly. Much like Suspend, sets you up for more storm the next turn.
Yeah, this is I actually really like this card. It's very blue collar, but I think that this is a nice little tie the room together card, specifically because it doesn't do it on upon casting. It's upon resolution. So I think casting this and just drawing a card is pretty solid, especially when you know you're going to have the rebound, and being able to utilize this along with some of the other cards in here for a little mini storm theme where the cards aren't bad on their own, which is often a problem with Storm, I think means that I like this card more than I normally would because of the context of the rest of the set and what it's giving you for those strategies.
For sure. And this can show up in a cube that's doing Madness and Threshold as well. Fits pretty well. It gets you cards in the graveyard.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, working quite hard for a bunch of different strategies. All right, next up, we have Fast and Furious. This is a split card, and I really love reading split cards on the internet. So I'm going to do so. I'm going to start with Fast, 2 and a red, instant. Discard a card, then draw 2 cards. All right, solid. So we've seen that effect before, but that's only half of it. And Furious is 3 red, say sorcery. Furious deals 3 damage to each creature without flying. I think just like most split cards, you would not generally play them in isolation, but the fact that this is a sweeper for 5 and a red divination, or as close as you can get, means that this is as an uncommon in a pauper cube. I mean, I think this is actually pretty easy inclusion for its utility.
And this is another card where if you cast fast and you're empty-handed, you'll just draw the 2 cards. So you get the actual red divination there.
Instant speed too.
For sure. Yeah. Furious, great sweeper for peasant. Just makes sense for those kinds of cubes.
Yep. Yeah. Great slot for those.
Right. Next we have Flame Blitz, a 1 red mana enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, Flame Blitz deals 5 damage to each planeswalker, cycling 2. So this is one of those cards you put in your modern sideboard. We talked a little bit about this recently on the podcast. Like, this card has horrible play patterns. It doesn't like answer a planeswalker in a way where you're engaging with your opponents. It's just like, if you have multiple planeswalkers in your deck, I got you. And then it also just has cycling. So if it's in your cube, it's probably going to be main deck somewhere. And it's just like a goofy answer thing, obviously is good at what it does. And then the opportunity cost is very low. And this is like a grief your friends kind of thing. I strongly dislike the idea of putting it in a cube. I know it's going to show up in a lot of cubes.
Yeah, this is a really interesting card for me because I feel like this card will never be drafted highly, ever.
Mm-hmm.
But the amount, like, I have to believe that the frequency that it's main decked compared to where it's drafted is probably very high because it has cycling.
Yep.
So, like, the cost of having your deck is like pretty close to 0. And the upside of you played a planeswalker, I killed it, and then also prevented you from playing any other planeswalkers is like massive. Especially for red, when we were talking about having to like planeswalkers gaining life. Like, that's actually a pretty huge deal. So it's weird because it's like, is this a card I want to include in my cube? I don't know that it is, but I also know that like in a real life game situation, it's probably going to be pretty good, and it's going to be main decked a really high amount of time.
And this is why I wrote an article about this, and I think the title was "How to Gift Your Cube." I think of cards for cube in terms of being good, interesting, and fun. Is this card good? Obviously. This card obviously does what it aims to do, and the opportunity cost is low. Is this card interesting? No, not remotely. Not a chance. Not in your life. Nobody on Earth finds this interesting. Nobody could possibly find this interesting. Is it fun? I guess for one player. It's really unfun if you're the one with the planeswalkers. My counter offer, if you want to put this card in your cube, instead explore cutting all the planeswalkers. If you hate the idea of somebody controlling a planeswalker, don't give them the option.
That is an extreme take that I don't necessarily disagree with.
That's my brand.
But I like that it came out of your mouth instead of mine, so I can only like partially agree. Going, it's got some pretty good points, but I don't know if I fully can get down with it.
Yeah, I definitely get. Especially if we're getting into like vintage cube and it's like the planeswalkers are Ashiok and Oko, like Ashiok Nightmare, the 3-mana Ashiok, to be clear on that one. And it's like, yeah, playing against them sucks. So here's like another thing. And it's just like, I get it if you're being adversarial to stuff that's not fun, but we could also just like stop doing the stuff that's not fun. It just seems like the next logical step to me.
Yeah, but this card also gets the ones that are fun.
That's the problem, though. That's when this card becomes not fun.
Yeah, but then it's that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, like I said, I doubt I would ever put this in my cube. But if I were drafting, and if I'm drafting someone else's cube and this is here, I'm gonna draft it. Like, not high, but I'll draft it if I see it. Like, if I see it anytime on the wheel, this is probably a pretty high priority. Especially if I have 0 planeswalkers in my deck and can reasonably cast it. So
I have a friend who hates Gonti. Like the
hates
idea,
Gonti?
Yeah, he hates playing against Gonti.
I think that's an unreasonable card to hate. I think that says a lot about your friend.
Nah. So the whole thing is just like just grubby hands coming and touching your cards. It's I drafted that. It's my deck. So he hates Gonti. So anytime he sees it in a pack and cube, he just hate drafts it. Like, well, no one can cast it against me because it's in my deck. And I could see myself doing something like that with this card. Just like, no, we're not doing this, and just like enforcing the card not being in the cube.
Next card, Galvanic Relay. This is a sorcery for 2 and a red. And it says, exile the top card of your library. During your next turn, you may play this card, and you may play that card, and this has Storm. So this is a Storm card that kind of sets up other Storm cards, because it doesn't let you play the cards on this same turn.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes sense, because presumably you are spending all of your mana on the front end to get up to the Storm to be able to cast this.
So I've been playing the Pauper Constructed format since this set released on Magic Online, which I haven't done in years. And this card's messed up. I love this card. Like, you just cast a bunch of rituals because your deck's a bunch of rituals and then Storm cards. And then if you don't have the one that actually wins the game, then you cast this one. And then next turn, you're going to find it. And this card is a little bit harder to make work in Cube. It's like probably kind of slow to actually put in your Storm deck for a very high-powered cube, and then you probably don't have the right framework to really make it work every time, but it probably still can be really good if you just like do this for 3 and just like hit some card like creatures and just cheap spells off of it, or make your land drop. Like, this still could just show up and be good in Pauper Cube. It's not going to be nearly as exciting as it is in the Pauper Constructed format, but I can see this card doing things in a Pauper Cube, especially if he wants to have some Storm cards and have some cool games now and again.
Yeah, I think it's not all dissimilar from Light Up the Stage, where you're putting like resources in now to be able to cast stuff next turn in most cases, but the ceiling is higher. So yeah, I like it. I think this would be a fun one if you were doing the aforementioned like Storm and mini Storm stuff. And I really, again, want to just praise the design that they have done with Storm in this set, where the cards are, simply put, not dog shit like they normally would be.
Yeah, I do love this card.
Okay, next up, this has to be another one that Ryan likes. Harmonic Prodigy. 1 and a red. It is a human wizard, 1/3 with prowess. It says, whenever an ability of a shaman or another wizard you control triggers, trigger that ability an additional time. This is like Naban, except it never dies instead of always dies, because Naban's a 2/1. And this is a 1/3.
Really glad that you drew the comparison to Naban, because that's why I like this card.
I knew it. I knew, and we didn't talk about this. I just knew that was the angle.
And it's like infuriating when people insinuate that I like dog shit cards for prowess decks. So like, this card is like clearly not hitting the mark for doing a prowess thing. The types are wrong. A 1/3 is the wrong base stat for your 2-drop. Like, it just is not good for those decks. But Wizards are pretty rad, and
they have a lot of really cool come to play abilities.
Yeah, and that's like something I've been looking at, working on a party cube ever since the party mechanic was introduced in Zendikar Rising, and this is a card that has immediately caught my attention for that kind of thing, and I really like Adeliz the Cinderwind, and this card team is great in conjunction with Adeliz. You could really do some explosive fun stuff there.
Yeah. I wish that it gave itself double prowess. I guess I understand why it doesn't, but it's okay.
Okay, you would consider this card for a constructed prowess if it had double prowess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if this was like Clever Lumimancer, just a 1/3 instead of a 1 for 2, yeah.
Like a Lumimancer that always has power, or like a Kiln Fiend that pumps toughness, like.
Yeah.
You kind of like the middle ground between that, and like both of those cards kind of fail on their merits for their downsides, and then this card probably has enough combined upside to be awesome.
Yeah, I get why they didn't, because then you play it on turn 2, and then on turn 3 you cast 1 spell, and it's a 3/5.
It's like really easy to imagine winning consistently on turn 3 in a deck with Manamorphose and Lava Dart with a card with double prowess. So
yeah. It takes very minimal. Or maybe if you're not 20ing your opponent, you're getting to the point where they're probably saying, you know what, let's just go to the next game.
Exactly.
But yeah, I quite like this for, and not just for a tribal cube. I actually think that if you wanted to do like a wizard theme in a blue-red wizards theme in a traditional cube, having the redundant like copying wizard effects, I think is really good, because this card is significantly better than Nabon, which is a shame because I like Nabon, but it's a fragile little thing, and this is not.
All right, our next card is Kaleidoscorch, 1 in red for a sorcery with Converge. Kaleidoscorch deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast this spell. Flashback for 4 in a red, so it can do up to 2 damage on the front side. You flash it back for up to 5. This is a strictly different Firebolt. I don't think that this card you would necessarily put into any cube with a Firebolt. Firebolt is just classically powerful, having kind of shock and then flashback later. But we've been mentioning now and again, just like peasant cubes with tri-lands, that this is a card that can kill something early and then just be 5 anywhere late. And that's really powerful in that kind of environment.
Definitely. Yeah, and it's like almost as good as Firebolt, but the difference between 1 mana on the first cast of Firebolt just makes the difference for me.
Yeah. Like, it's not going to it doesn't really even necessarily vie for the same slot as Firebolt. It depends what your Firebolt is aiming to do. Like if it's trying to show up in red decks, Kaleidoscorch just doesn't do that. If it's trying to be a removal spell that maybe has a huge effect later, like, that's what Kaleidoscorch does. Firebolt is just kind of like either a solid burn spell or a good check on cheap creatures.
Yep. Firebolt provides there's like 2 different types of Firebolt decks. It's the aggressive Firebolt deck where you're casting it early and then you're spending your 5 mana out of your graveyard to like deal the last 2 to your opponent, or the defensive Firebolt decks where you are just trying to make sure that you kill creatures on curve as much as you possibly can while maintaining card advantage. And Kaleidoscorch really does an exceptional job in those second decks, and does a terrible job in the first decks because it's just usually strictly worse. But in the second deck where you can get a meaningful amount that's more than 2 for colors, then it becomes really awesome.
For sure.
Okay. Oh man, this is probably my favorite card. It's certainly my favorite red card that we don't have in the classic orientation. Which would make sense because I talked about how much I liked Sinkhole earlier. So
yeah, I figured if you liked Break the Ice, you would be cool with this one.
This is Obsidian Charmaw. This is 3 red. It is a dragon, so of course it is a 4/4 flyer, as I would say most dragons are. It says this spell costs 1 generic less to cast for each land your opponents control that could produce colorless. So specifically tap for colorless. And when Obsidian Charmaw enters the battlefield, destroy target non-basic land and opponent controls. Now, I don't dislike destroying opponents' lands. So I like this card. I like this card for 5 pretty reasonably, and I really love it for 4. And anything beyond that, I think it's just gravy. But the only downside on the opposite end of Break the Ice is you have to put a lower level of mana fixing in your cube purposefully. Like if you're like, I'm going to put Adakar Wastes in my cube so Obsidian Charmaw can come and destroy them with ease. That I don't think is a great thing to do. And I know this sounds like I'm making the opposite argument that I made for Break the Ice, but I don't think that's the case because this is a threat. This is a meaningful threat that also destroys lands, and then you end up with a 4/4 flying dragon where Break the Ice is just Sinkhole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of depending on your general power level and what your goals are. I think that a lot of people put in weaker lands as one of their stops for just people playing 4 or 5 color good stuff to stop the mana from being too good. Pathways are the most recent addition. Like I see Pathways in a lot of cubes, and they are to stop people from playing too many colors. And then Pain lands accomplish a fairly similar goal and also make aggressive decks a little bit better. So if your power level is generally high, and then you have these kind of worse mana fixing lands as a way to curb the power of fixing, I can see doing Obsidian Charmaw. if your cube power level is kind of low, and then you have a bunch of lands that are there to make Obsidian Charma better, I like that a lot less.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I don't dislike destroying. I like that this can destroy any non-basic land, and I think that part is fine. I just wouldn't want to put this in a cube where you're punishing people by just playing the regular mana fixing in a cube.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they're just like, oh yeah, I got one Sulphurous Springs, it's like, well, I'm gonna destroy that for 4 because you decided to play that early to fix your mana.
When I still maintained the 360 card Grixis cube, and also the Magic Online 540 build had Eldrazi, like Thought-Knot Seer and Reality Smasher, and there was Eldrazi Temple being the standout in a number of just lands that tap for colorless mana. And the power level of that cube is very high. It's a lot of very powerful combo decks, but then it still has a red aggressive deck. I think this card is just a slam dunk for that environment.
Nice. Yeah, I like it. Big fan. Okay, what we got next?
We have Revolutionist. 5 and a red for a 3/3 human wizard. When Revolutionist enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Madness for 3 and a red. So kind of a play on Anarchist. It gets instants or sorceries. And then that sort of thing, just creature that gets back instant or sorcery for approximately this mana. Like, is it Chronarch? This is the kind of thing that showed up in Pauper Cubes since Pauper Cubes have existed. Like,
definitely.
This ability is just good. And if your Pauper Cube has Looter Core or Merfolk Looter, like getting to Madness this in, it's actually going to be better than any of the other versions ever printed, off the top of my head at least, when you do get to Madness it. Like, in a big way too. Like, it didn't cost you a card to loot this away, and it got you a card back. And then also 3/3 is bigger than Sefek tends to be.
Yeah. I think that this is, when you Madness this card out, I actually think that the upside of this card is pretty substantial compared to most Madness cards.
Yeah.
Because you get a 3/3 on its face, and then you also draw probably the best card out of your graveyard, rather than discarding a card, which is actually kind of insane when you think about it. I'm a big fan of, like, Is It Chronarch and Archaeomancer and cards like that. This is obviously requires some other hoops, which is why it, 1, costs 6 mana, and 2, we're including it in the custom section. But if you have any tangential discard that comes up with any sort of regularity in your cube, and of course if you're supporting it, then I think this is a slam dunk.
Yep, definitely agree.
Yep, cool. Okay, we have another Storm card. This is a very fun one. Spreading Insurrection, 4 and a red. Sorcery, gain control of target creature you don't control until end of turn. Untap that creature, gains haste until end of turn, and it has Storm. So a nice callback to the regular Insurrection from Onslaught almost 2 decades ago. This is I'm like torn on this Storm payoff, because generally I like to have Storm payoffs that don't require your opponent to be doing anything in particular. Mm-hmm. They just are there, and you just doing what you're doing. This does require them to be doing something for this to be meaningful at all, which is have creatures. However, doing this simply for 2 is a huge deal. If you just take 2 creatures, that is often enough to win the game. And that's kind of where I'm looking at this card from that angle.
Yeah, that would be a card that could show up in these peasant queues we've been talking about that have weaker Storm packages. It fits pretty naturally and that sort of thing. Your opponent will generally have creatures for you to threaten. And then some cards that were recently printed in Commander Legends. There was just a few just expensive commons with Cascade and some uncommons as well. Like 6 mana, 6/3 Cascade is one of the red cards, I believe. And those were seeing a decent clip of actual Pauper constructed play before Horizons dropped. I think that generally been overtaken by Chatterstorm, but whatever. Just cascading this card and getting a double threaten, that's just massive. That often will win the game in short order.
Yeah, just getting 2 of this, and that's kind of where I'm looking at this. Like, you're not trying to build up a massive storm. This is like, I just need to get it to the point where I can cast it and win, and that's probably a storm of 1 and almost certainly a storm of 2. And there doesn't need to be much context unless you're facing down tokens and you have non-trampling or non-evasive creatures. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, if you're taking actual factual creatures, like creature cards from your opponent, and that is what your opponent has left to block with, you're going to end the game generally when you cast it. So I like it less than some of the other storm cards we've talked about, but if you are wanting to support that archetype, then I would still include this one.
Yeah, I like it less as a baseline. I like the idea of it working in the places where it can work.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
All right. Next we have Unholy Heat. It's 1 red for an instant. Unholy Heat deals 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Delirium is going to deal 6 damage to that creature or planeswalker instead. So one off a little bit earlier about red just not getting a lot of good new cards, and a lot of that is that the cheap burn spells can't hit players, and it makes sense just from designing cards for a game with a deep history like Magic. You know, the decks that play all the cards that go upstairs don't really get more interesting and are often not that interesting to play. It doesn't make a ton of sense to put power there. But then the other side is you do end up making these cards that are only good against certain things and only in the early game. But then the extra text on Unholy Heat, I think, does put it over to make it actually a pretty cool and powerful card. If you have Delirium, it just deals 6, and that kills a lot of stuff. You have to work for it. You have to care about Delirium. But it's a red card that's good against creatures early and good against creatures and planeswalkers late.
6 is like 100.
Yeah, it's
it
a
might
lot.
as well be 100. Yeah, like that's just going to kill anything. I'm of all of the cards, and I agree with Ryan. Generally, am unfairly slightly turned off from the things that just say creature or planeswalker, which is most things these days. But if you are playing any of those, I would play this one, because the upside of being able to do 6 damage that kills pretty much everything.
Mm-hmm.
That kills a Grave Titan. Now, I would say it's unlikely you have Grave Titan in the same cube as Unholy Strength, because the power disparity between those 2 cards is pretty vast. But it kills things like Grave Titan for a single mana, and there's not many other red cards that can do that, if any.
Kills Colossal Dreadmaw.
Kills Colossal Dreadmaw. It kills a Archfiend of Sorrows. That might be more your speed for that, but yeah. So this is a card that is probably going to make it in a very high number of cubes. Probably all but the most powerful cubes, I would imagine.
Yes.
Okay, so the next group, just want to provide a little bit of pointing out. These are generally more obvious. Like we talked about on last episode, we have a couple or 3 artifact modular creatures, this time in red rather than white. So we have Arcbound Slasher, which is 4 in a red artifact creature cat with modular 4 and Riot. And Riot says when it enters the battlefield, this enters with your choice of a 1/1 counter or haste. Love this card for that. It's either a 4/4 with haste or a 5/5 with the 5 counters. Arcbound Tracker, 2 in a red, artifact creature dog, has Menace modular 2, and whenever you cast a spell other than your first spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Arcbound Tracker. So that means your 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, etc. Just anything that's not your first. And then Arcbound Whelp. The other 2 were commons. This is an uncommon. 3 in a red, artifact creature dragon with modular 2, and it has flying, and of course the Whelp ability of pay a red, give it +1/+0 until end of turn. If you are supporting +1/+1 counters in your cube, and if you are wanting to do more of the Arcbound stuff, I think these 3 are easy inclusions for that type of archetype.
Yeah. And of the group, I think Arcbound Tracker has the highest ceiling if you're already interested. Like, actually, whether you're interested in the modular stuff or not, I think that this card could make its way into a Pauper cube. Like, you'll be able to pump this up in a way that not a lot of red creatures can in a Pauper cube. If you have some other artifact creatures, great, you can do the modular thing. And then if you are doing the modular thing, this can really get out of hand quick. And it's not quite Arcbound Prototype, but 3 mana for modular 2 is pretty solid as well.
Yeah, and it has Menace. That's not irrelevant here.
Yep.
Because it's going to continue to grow. And man, like being able to put +1/+1 counters on modular creatures without having to interact with the creatures themselves, like they're just on the battlefield as you're doing this, it doesn't care the type of spells that you're casting. It doesn't need to be instant or sorcery. It doesn't need to be creatures. Just like, was it the first one? If it wasn't, cool, you get a counter.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that all of these as a group are pretty solid. I would say as a group, they're probably on par with the white ones. They don't provide the same rate as the what was it? The Mouser?
Yeah.
Was it the Mouser?
The Mouser is the
2/2 for 2?
lifelink. The prototype is a 2/2.
Oh, that's right. The prototype. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't. It's not providing just the raw stats for a modular creature that one does, but I mean, pretty solid. And the Slasher is even that's just a very big modular creature. And having haste with modular creatures is pretty good because it makes them more likely to be blocked or traded with, just how all haste creatures are. So modular 4 is still a lot, just for any type of cube that is caring about doing this theme, like we said.
Definitely. Right. Next up, we have Gargadon. You've seen Greater Gargadon. You've seen Lesser Gargadon. Now you get to see the original. 5 red, 7/5 beast with trample. Suspend 4 for 1 and a red. This card, I mean, I love that we have Gargadon. This card is not that powerful or exciting, but I can see this showing up in a lot of Pauper cubes anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, after it comes off suspend, it gains haste. So a 7/5 trample haster is no joke. Mm-hmm. However you slice it. So I am surprised that Greater Gargadon is a rare, Lesser Gargadon, perhaps mistakenly at the time, was an uncommon, and now Gargadon is a common. But, they did their best. Okay, so the last card, the wild ride for this one, Glimpse of Tomorrow. Suspend 3 is a sorcery, red. And then when it comes off of suspend, it casts Warp World. Shuffle all permanents you own into your library. Then reveal that many cards from the top of your library. Put all non-aura permanent cards revealed this way onto the battlefield. Then do the same for aura cards. Put the rest in the bottom of your library in any order.
And it's one-sided.
Yes,
just you.
That is a good point. Which is maybe a benefit.
Yeah, it kind of depends what your opponent's up to.
I don't know.
In general, I think that, either you're using this in a multiplayer cube just because it's wacky and some weird stuff's going to happen. You can also put this in your cube just if you just want some more stuff to put Eldrazi out there. It's not the most powerful. Suspend 3 is a lot of time to wait. It's also random. But I can see somebody being excited about that.
Yeah. I mean, there's enough token things, kind of like we were talking about with Profane Tutor, which is the black card in this cycle. Being able to do this on 2 and then build up, put tokens into play, and then just cast it without having to spend mana to do it that turn. There's something to that.
Yep.
I feel I'm very selfish when it comes to these cards. There's times that I like this and there's times that I don't, but I want to decide when that is. Like I don't like when my opponent does this and I'm not interested in doing this bullshittery, but sometimes I am interested in doing it and then I just want to do it. And I'm just like, sorry.
I generally don't like the idea of this card for paper Magic. I've seen it happen a little bit on Magic Online, and that's instantaneous. The thing that's going to kill you or the fact that they whiffed is immediately apparent. Yeah, the shuffling, that can be kind of tense, but it's just like, all right, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 permanents. Okay. Okay, here's one. I'm putting this in. It just like takes time, and it's kind of exciting, but the experience is not very repeatable in a fun way.
That's a good way to say that. Experience is not repeatable. And I don't know. I'm trying to think, would I ever draft this in a cube? Would I ever be bold enough to try to do this? Because if you're drafting Glimpse of Tomorrow, and you're intending to play it, that's your deck.
I would play this 100% of the time in my deck with Maelstrom Wanderer.
Okay, sure. All right, fair enough. Ryan, any other red cards?
There was like some stuff I thought about mentioning, but it's all pretty bad rates and like some stuff that flips coins that I don't really care about. And I don't know. All just like goofy and peasants. I don't mean that's not personal if you like the goofy stuff, but it is goofy.
Yeah, there are a number of coin flippy cards. So, all right, that is our Modern Horizons 2 Part 2 black and red cards. We'll be back next week with everything else. Green, artifacts, lands, multicolored, the whole gambit of everything we haven't talked about these last 2 episodes. If you would like to subscribe to the 540, you can do so on any of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, Stitcher, YouTube, even your local podcast app. Leave us a review if you are listening on a platform where you're able to do so. That is always quite helpful. Get that algorithm going. It loves eating interaction and spitting it back out favorably for us. So someone had suggested the best they could do was to simply download and just let it play without listening to it. And you know what? You'll get more out of it if you listen, but that's the next best thing. So have at it.
Yeah, that works. That plays.
You can find me on Twitter at jparnell1. And of course, you can find my other podcast by searching Think Twice MTG anywhere you're listening right now. And you can find me on Commander Versus on StarCityGames.com and YouTube. And my stream at twitch.tv/jparnell. The last couple of weeks, I have done the Arena Cube, which has been quite fun. I finally failed to get 7 wins after like 5 tries in a row. So my win rate for this iteration is pretty good. Spoiler alert, everything we said about the cube last time, a couple months ago, has held up exactly. So not a whole lot has changed if you're interested in racking up some wins.
Round of applause for us. Good job, Justin and Ryan.
Yeah, we had the foresight. Ryan, what you got?
You can find my articles weekly on StarCityGames.com. I often say what my article's about. I'm pretty confident I know what this week's going to be, and if it is what I think it's going to be, I think a lot of you are going to love it, but you'll have to check the website to find out. You know, I mentioned the weird scheduling thing where you hear it after it's published, but I say it before it's written. So I'm going to stop saying what the article is. But if it is what I think it is, I think a lot of you are going to like it a lot. And you can find whatever my article's about as it drops, any updates like that on my Twitter at Ryan Overdrive, and just my general curmudgeonly musings there as well.
Excellent. Make sure to check that out, especially now that I don't know exactly what I'm going to be looking for.
Anything could happen.
I'm excited and scared at the same time. We will be back next week with perhaps our final episode in our foray of reviewing Modern Horizons 2. It's obviously a number of cards again next week, and we went slightly longer this week than we did last week, and I'm sure that will continue next week too. So, thank you all for listening to the 540. We'll catch you next time.